Moonlight Merms present Eco-Horror. A rapidly spreading fungal disease transforms plants into crystalline structures. Sit back, listen close, journey begins now. Chapter 1: The First Bloom. The first sign was a glint where there shouldn't have been one. Dr. Sarah Chen had spent enough time in Greenhouse 3 to know every reflection, every play of light through its polycarbonate panels. This was different, a prismatic shimmer among her Arabidopsis specimens that made her pause mid-stride during her morning inspection. She leaned closer, adjusting her glasses. The small research plant's leaves bore an odd translucence at their edges, as if they were slowly turning to glass. When she touched one gently with her pen, it made a faint tinkling sound. Her first thought was frost damage, but the climate controls showed normal readings, 72 degrees F, 65% humidity. "What are you?" she whispered, carefully extracting the affected plant and placing it in a sterile container. The crystalline effect seemed to radiate outward from the stem, transforming the ordinary green tissue into something that caught and fractured light like a prism. Beautiful but deeply raw. In her adjacent lab, Sarah prepared slides with practiced efficiency, her movements precise despite the tremor of excitement in her hands. Through the microscope, the plant tissue revealed structures she'd never seen before, thread-like hyphae that seemed to be replacing cellular material with crystalline formations, spreading through the plant's vascular system like frozen lightning. Dr. Chen, Marcus, her graduate assistant, appeared in the doorway. "The mice in room 204 are dead." She looked up sharply. "All of them, 3 out of 4, found them this morning, no obvious cause." Sarah frowned. Room 204 was directly adjacent to where she'd first noticed the crystalline growth. Any unusual observations? Just some strange residue in their water bottles, almost like ground glass but finer. She felt a chill despite the lab's warmth. "Show me." The dead mice lay in their enclosure, bodies unmarked but rigid. Sarah donned gloves and lifted one carefully. Its fur felt oddly brittle, and when she gently pressed its abdomen, she felt something crack beneath the skin. The remaining live mouse huddled in a corner, breathing rapidly, its whiskers bearing the same strange crystalline sheen she'd observed on the plant leaves. "Full necropsy protocol," she instructed Marcus. "And we need to quarantine that entire section of specimens. Something's not right here." Back at her microscope, Sarah examined more samples. The fungal structures were unlike anything in her reference materials. They seemed to be actively converting organic matter into crystalline forms at the cellular level. When she adjusted the lighting, the transformed tissue scattered light in complex patterns that made her eyes water. A crash from the greenhouse interrupted her observations. She found Marcus standing frozen, staring at a shattered tray of specimens. Crystalline fragments littered the floor, and a fine, glittering dust hung in the air. "Don't breathe," she ordered, pulling him backward. "Out now." They sealed the door and activated the emergency ventilation system. Through the glass, Sarah watched the glittering particles slowly settle. Marcus coughed repeatedly as she guided him to a decontamination shower. "I barely touched them," he gasped between coughs. "They just disintegrated like sugar glass." Sarah's mind raced as she helped him remove his contaminated lab coat. The crystalline transformation wasn't just spreading, it was making the affected tissue catastrophically fragile, and those particles they'd released. "We need to document everything," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And then we need to contact biosafety immediately." But as she helped Marcus clean up, she noticed his hands trembling. His breathing remained labored, and there was a faint sheen to his skin that caught the fluorescent lights. Over the next few hours, Sarah methodically photographed and sampled the affected specimens, her movements careful and deliberate. The crystalline transformation was accelerating. Plants that had shown only slight symptoms in the morning now gleamed like carved ice, their structures maintaining perfect botanical form but rendered in translucent, brittle crystal. She found more dead mice in other rooms, always near affected plants, their bodies showing the same strange rigidity. Under the microscope, their tissue samples revealed the same fungal invasion, organic cells systematically replaced by crystalline structures. Marcus's cough grew worse. When she checked on him in the break room, she found him hunched over, hands pressed to his chest. "It burns," he wheezed. "Like I've inhaled glass." Sarah called emergency services, then returned to her microscope with trembling hands. The latest samples showed the fungal structures multiplying at an impassable rate, spreading through plant tissue like frost across a window. When she adjusted the magnification, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The crystalline formations weren't just growing, they were organizing themselves into complex geometric patterns that seemed almost purposeful. She was recording her observations when another crash echoed from the greenhouse. This time an entire shelf of specimens had shattered, releasing clouds of glittering spores that danced in the air like deadly diamond dust. The ventilation system labored to contain them, but Sarah could already see the particles settling on nearby plants, spreading their crystalline contagion. The ambulance arrived for Marcus as the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the greenhouse's increasingly crystalline contents. Sarah watched them load him into the vehicle. his breathing now a horrible crackling sound. In the fading light, his skin seemed to catch and reflect the ambulance's flashing lights in ways that human tissue should not. She returned to her lab and began composing an urgent email to the university's biosafety committee, her fingers trembling as they flew across the keyboard. The preliminary data was horrifying. The fungal infection wasn't just killing plants, it was fundamentally transforming them into something else. Something that could spread through spores and potentially infect animals, including humans. As she worked, she became aware of a subtle change in the air, a faint crystalline chiming like wind through ice-covered branches. The sound came from the greenhouse where more and more plants were succumbing to the transformation. In the deepening twilight, they glowed with a faint internal luminescence that turned the research facility into a garden of ghostly glass. Sarah glanced at her hands as she typed, checking for any sign of the telltale sheen. Her throat felt raw and she couldn't shake the feeling that every breath drew tiny invisible shards deeper into her lungs. The university needed to know what was happening here. The world needed to know. But as she prepared to send her report, a new email appeared in her inbox. A tersely worded message from the department head requesting her immediate presence at an emergency meeting. The subject line read, Containment Protocol Alpha. She looked through the window at her transformed greenhouse where the crystalline plants chimed softly in the gathering darkness. Already she could see similar glints and sparkles in the ornamental gardens outside, spreading like stars appearing in the evening sky. Whatever this was, it had already escaped containment. Sarah saved her data to an external drive and slipped it into her pocket before heading to the meeting. Her footsteps echoed through empty corridors as she walked, and in every window she passed she saw the same ghostly reflections, a garden of glass spreading across the campus, beautiful and lethal in the fading light. The emergency lights cast harsh shadows in the administrative wing. Sarah found herself moving more slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. The memory of those shattered specimens was too fresh, the sound of Marcus's breathing too vivid. Every surface seemed to hold the potential for transformation. Every shadow might conceal spreading crystal formations. Through an open window, she heard a sound from the campus gardens, a delicate musical tinkling that shouldn't have been there. A breeze stirred the trees, and instead of the soft rustle of leaves, there came the clear bell-like tones of branches that had already begun to change. She thought of her earliest observations mere hours ago when this had seemed like a fascinating anomaly. Now she understood they weren't just witnessing a disease or an invasion. They were watching the world begin to transform into something alien and crystalline, one cell at a time. The meeting room door stood open, spilling fluorescent light into the hallway. Sarah paused before entering, her hand unconsciously rising to her throat. It felt tight, scratchy, as if she'd swallowed ground glass. In the harsh overhead lighting, she examined her skin carefully, searching for any sign of that telltale crystalline sheen. Behind her, through the windows, the transformed garden chimed its alien music into the gathering night. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the raw scrape of it in her chest, and stepped forward to face whatever came next. She knew with a certainty that chilled her more than any fever that this was only the beginning. The data drive felt heavy in her pocket, evidence of something that could no longer be contained, no longer be denied. Outside, the crystalline transformation continued its inexorable spread, turning the living world into a garden of deadly glass, one glittering fragment at a time. As she reached for the door handle, Sarah caught her reflection in the brushed metal surface. For a moment, she thought she saw something crystalline gleaming in her eyes, but when she looked again, it was gone. The only sound was the distant, ethereal chiming of transformed plants in the night breeze, like wind through wind chimes made of souls. Chapter 2: Spreading Patterns. The security footage flickered across Sarah's laptop screen in grainy black and white, the greenhouse interior rendered in stark shadows. She leaned closer, squinting at the timestamp, 2:47 a.m. There, a subtle movement caught her eye. The peace lily by the south wall seemed to shiver, its leaves trembling without any breeze. As she watched, a silvery sheen crept across its surface like frost spreading across a window pane. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as she documented the transformation rate. The entire process took just under 12 minutes, far faster than she'd observed during daylight hours. She rewound the footage again, watching as the plant's organic matter crystallized in accelerated time, its cells restructuring into something that defied biological classification. A sharp knock at her office door made her jump. Dr. Chen. Campus security officer Martinez stood in the doorway, his usual easy smile replaced by tight-lipped concern. "We've got a situation in the memorial garden." The morning air held an autumn chill as Sarah followed Martinez across the quad. Students hurried past, pulling jackets closer, completely unaware of what was happening around them. Near the biology building's west entrance, the memorial garden's carefully tended beds had been cordoned off with yellow caution tape. Groundskeeper noticed it during morning rounds, Martinez explained, lifting the tape for her to duck under. said he's never seen anything like it. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The garden's prized rose bushes, decades-old specimens that bloomed reliably each spring, had transformed overnight. Where vibrant plants had stood just yesterday, crystalline structures now caught the morning light, their thorns and stems rendered in perfect, terrible clarity. "Don't touch anything," she warned as Martinez reached toward a translucent bloom. "The fragments are sharp enough to." A sudden gust of wind interrupted her and one of the crystallized roses shattered. Sarah yanked Martinez backward as glittering shards scattered across the mulch, releasing a barely visible cloud of spores. "Jesus," Martinez muttered, stumbling away. "Is this the same thing from your greenhouse?" Sarah nodded, already pulling out her phone to document the spread. "It's moving faster than I anticipated. We need to get this area properly contained before a scream cut through the morning air." Sarah spun toward the sound. A student had collapsed near the garden's edge, clutching his throat. His friend knelt beside him, panicked voice carrying across the quad. "Help, someone call an ambulance." Sarah ran toward them, heart pounding. The fallen student's lips had taken on a bluish tinge, his breathing coming in desperate gasps. Small cuts peppered his exposed skin where crystalline fragments had struck him, each wound rimmed with an alarming silvery sheen. "Get back," she shouted at the gathering crowd. "Everyone needs to clear the area." She pulled her scarf over her nose and mouth, knowing it was likely too late for such precautions. The spores were microscopic, designed by whatever twisted evolution had created them to spread on the slightest breeze. Campus police arrived minutes later, followed by paramedics who loaded the unconscious student into an ambulance. Sarah watched it speed away, sirens wailing, while Martinez coordinated with his team to expand the cordoned area. Her phone buzzed, a message from Department Chair Williams requesting her immediate presence in his office. The administration building's climate-controlled interior felt surreal after the chaos outside. Williams sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, while two other faculty members Sarah recognized from the board occupied nearby chairs. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. "Dr. Chen," Williams began, his tone carefully measured, "we understand you've been conducting some unusual research lately. If you're referring to the crystalline fungal infection, yes, and it's no longer contained to my greenhouse." "The memorial garden has been temporarily closed for maintenance," Williams interrupted smoothly. "We're handling the situation." Sarah stared at him incredulously. "Handling it? A student was just hospitalized. We need to alert the CDC, implement proper quarantine protocols. What we need," Williams cut in, "is to avoid causing unnecessary panic. The university's reputation, to hell with the university's reputation." Sarah's palms slammed against his desk. "This infection is spreading exponentially. I've documented growth rates that defy everything we know about fungal propagation. If we don't contain this now, Dr. Chen," Williams's voice turned sharp, "I understand you're concerned, but this institution has procedures for handling such incidents. We've already contacted appropriate parties to investigate the situation discreetly." Sarah recognized the dismissal in his tone, the implicit threat beneath his words. She thought of the security footage still playing on her laptop, the time-lapse transformation that haunted her dreams. "Fine," she said finally. "But I'm continuing my research. We need to understand what we're dealing with." The walk back to her office felt longer than usual, each step weighted with growing dread. Students passed by, laughing, checking phones, living their normal lives while an invisible apocalypse gathered momentum around them. Sarah's phone buzzed again, a text from her research assistant, Katie. "Emergency at greenhouse, come quick." Sarah broke into a run, ignoring the curious stares. The greenhouse door was ajar when she arrived, Katie's wide-eyed face visible through the glass. Inside, Sarah's breath froze in her lungs. The transformation had accelerated beyond her worst predictions. Entire sections of specimens had crystallized, their structures catching the light in beautiful, horrifying patterns. "It's spreading faster near the workstations," Katie said quietly, "where we spend the most time." Sarah approached her research bench, noting how the crystallization seemed to radiate outward from areas of frequent human contact. The implications made her skin crawl. She reached for her notebook, then stopped, staring at her trembling hands. Tiny silver lines traced the edges of a paper cut she'd gotten that morning. The drive home that evening felt like moving through a dream. Sarah's mind raced with calculations, theories, possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She needed to review her data, compile evidence that even Williams couldn't ignore. The university's attempt to suppress information would only make things worse. Her apartment building's familiar outline offered no comfort. Sarah climbed the stairs mechanically, keys jingling in shaking hands. The door swung open to darkness and she reached for the light switch. The soft click illuminated her worst fear. Her collection of houseplants, carefully tended succulents, the spider plant she'd kept alive since graduate school, the aging peace lily from her mother, had begun to change. Crystalline structures caught the light, throwing rainbow refractions across her walls. As she watched, a leaf on her monstera shivered, silvery transformation creeping across its surface. Sarah backed away, bumping into the door frame. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket, filled with evidence she knew would be confiscated if she didn't act quickly. The university would try to contain this information, but they couldn't contain the spread. Not anymore. Through her window, she could see other apartments, other windows filled with other plants. How many had already begun to change? How many spores were already drifting through ventilation systems, carried on clothing, floating on evening breezes? She thought of the infected student, his skin already showing signs of transformation. A soft crackling sound drew her attention back to the monster. Another leaf had completely crystallized, its surface catching the light like cut glass. As she watched, a hair-thin crack appeared along its edge. The leaf trembled and Sarah knew what would happen next. She lunged for the door, but not quite fast enough. The crystalline leaf shattered, sending fragments and invisible spores through the air. A sharp pain bloomed across her cheek where a shard had cut her. Her fingers came away bloody, the wound already taking on a silvery sheen. Sarah leaned against her closed door, heart pounding. Through the peephole, she could see her neighbor watering the plants on their shared landing, completely unaware of the transformation taking place beneath their fingers. The cut on her cheek burned with increasing intensity. Her phone buzzed the hospital. The infected student had taken a turn for the worse, his condition deteriorating rapidly. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the security footage, the way the plants seemed to transform faster in human presence. They weren't just spreading randomly. They were adapting, evolving, using human proximity to accelerate their growth. The realization hit her with devastating clarity. They weren't just witnessing an ecological disaster. They were watching the beginning of a transformation that would reshape life itself, turning Earth's lush biosphere into a garden of glass. And humanity, in its desperate attempt to control and contain information, was only helping it spread. Sarah opened her eyes, watching as another leaf began to crystallize. The transformation seemed to pause momentarily, as if sensing her attention, then accelerated. She pressed her hand against the cut on her cheek, feeling the slight roughness where the skin had begun to change. Outside her window, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through her apartment's crystal garden. Soon, darkness would fall, and in the night more plants would change, more spores would spread, more people would become unwitting carriers of this glittering plague. She reached for her phone, fingers hovering over the keypad. The university would try to stop her, but someone needed to know the truth. Someone needed to understand what was coming. As she began to type, a soft crackling sound filled the air, the sound of organic matter surrendering to crystalline transformation multiplied across countless plants in countless homes. The sound of a world beginning to change. The message she finally sent was simple: it's not just spreading, it's evolving, and we're helping it. Sarah looked up from her phone to find her reflection caught in a crystallized leaf. For a moment, she could have sworn the silvery surface rippled, like something alive trying to break free from its glass prison. The cut on her cheek burned brighter, and in the fading light she watched as tiny crystal structures began to form along its edges, beautiful and terrible in their perfect geometry. Chapter 3: Quarantine Protocols. The hazmat-suited figures moved through the greenhouse like astronauts exploring an alien world, their respirators hissing with each measured breath. Dr. Sarah Chen watched from behind the newly erected containment barrier as they photographed and collected samples from her life's work, now transformed into something beautiful and terrible. The crystalline structures caught the morning light, refracting it into countless rainbow patterns across the walls, a deceptively enchanting display that belied their lethal nature. Dr. Chen, we need you to walk us through your observations again. The CDC field director's voice crackled through her protective mask. Every detail matters now. Sarah's eyes drifted to the far corner where Marcus should have been tending to the orchids. Instead, that section now hosted a human-shaped formation of translucent crystal, fingers forever frozen in the act of reaching toward a specimen. Her research assistant's final pose preserved like a macabre sculpture. The transformation began in the experimental hybridization section, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Initially, I thought it was mineral deposits from contaminated soil samples, but the crystalline structures spread rapidly, converting organic matter into these glass-like formations within hours. The director made notes on his tablet, the stylus scratching against the screen. And you noticed acceleration in the conversion rate when researchers were present? Yes. The proximity of living human tissue appears to act as a catalyst. Sarah's hand unconsciously touched the clear patch spreading across her forearm, hidden beneath her protective suit. She hadn't reported that yet, couldn't bring herself to become another data point. A technician approached with a sealed container holding her research hard drives and notebooks. All digital and physical records have been secured, sir. Implementing information quarantine protocols. Sarah felt a fresh wave of nausea that had nothing to do with spore exposure. Years of research, generations of carefully cultivated specimens, all her data now classified and locked away, but she couldn't blame them, not after what they'd found in the satellite imagery. The CDC director brought up a holographic display showing thermal mapping of the region. Glowing hot spots pulsed across the landscape like malignant stars, each one corresponding to areas of human activity. Downtown. The shopping district, residential neighborhoods, the infection wasn't spreading randomly, it was following people. We've identified similar growth patterns in 6 other major metropolitan areas, he said gravely. The spread appears exponential. We're implementing full containment protocols, but given the airborne dispersal of spores, he left the implications unspoken. Through the greenhouse glass, Sarah could see military vehicles arriving, their dull green forms incongruous against the university's manicured grounds. Medical tents were being erected in the parking lot. She thought of the university president's desperate attempts to suppress information about the infection, his pathetic concerns about enrollment numbers and donor relationships. Too late for any of that now. A crash from inside the greenhouse drew their attention. One of the hazmat technicians had accidentally brushed against a crystallized fern. The brittle fronds had shattered, releasing a cloud of iridescent spores that danced in the air like diamond dust. The tech quickly backed away, but Sarah knew the protective gear wouldn't help if even a single spore found a gap in the seals. How long before metamorphosis begins after exposure? The director asked. Sarah watched the spores settling on surfaces, already beginning to glitter with unnatural potential. Based on Marcus, 4 to 6 hours for initial signs, total transformation within 24. She didn't mention the burning sensation spreading up her arm, the strange rigidity creeping into her fingers. More military vehicles were arriving now, including mobile decontamination units and what looked suspiciously like mobile cremation facilities. The university's central quad had become a staging ground for what was rapidly evolving into a major containment operation. Students were being evacuated, many already wearing masks, though Sarah knew those would be useless against the microscopic spores. "We need to discuss your initial samples," the director said, "the ones you received from the Agricultural Research Station. Our analysts found some anomalies in their genetic structure that suggest." He was interrupted by urgent shouting from the parking lot. Sarah turned to see a student collapse, their body convulsing as crystalline formations burst through their skin like glass flowers blooming in fast motion. The transformation was happening faster now. The infection was adapting, evolving, learning to convert human tissue more efficiently. Medical personnel rushed to help but were held back by military guards. They all watched in horrified fascination as the transformation completed in minutes rather than hours. Where a person had been, there now stood a perfect crystal statue, beautiful and terrible in its precision. "It's not just plants anymore," Sarah whispered, though she'd known this was coming since finding Marcus. "It's learning to convert any organic matter." The pain in her arm had progressed to her shoulder now, and she could feel the first hints of crystalline hardness beneath her skin. The director was barking orders into his radio, calling for enhanced containment protocols and immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel. But Sarah's attention was drawn to the tree line at the edge of campus. The late autumn leaves were catching the sunlight strangely, their surfaces beginning to glitter with an unnatural sheen. The infection had already spread beyond any hope of containment. One of the technicians emerged from the greenhouse with the latest sensor readings. "Sir, we're detecting unprecedented levels of spore activity in the air. The barometric pressure changes from the incoming storm system appear to be affecting dispersal patterns." Sarah looked up at the gathering clouds, imagining millions of microscopic spores being lifted into the upper atmosphere, carried on air currents to rain down on populations across the continent. The crystal garden would soon bloom everywhere. "Dr. Chen," the director's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Dr. Chen, are you all right?" She realized she had been standing motionless, staring at the sky. Her right arm had gone completely numb now, and when she looked down, she could see crystalline patterns beginning to show through her skin, beautiful fractal formations refracting the light. "You need to look at the original research station samples again," she said quickly, fighting to get the words out while she still could. "The genetic markers aren't natural, someone engineered this. It's not just a mutation or new species, it's a design system. The way it targets organic matter, the acceleration in human presence, the dispersal patterns, none of it evolved naturally." The director's eyes widened behind his face shield as he finally noticed the crystalline formations creeping up her neck. He backed away, signaling for a containment team. Sarah didn't blame him. She could feel the transformation accelerating, spreading through her tissue with increasing speed. The pain was fading now, replaced by an almost pleasant sensation of lightness. "The agricultural station," she insisted, her voice becoming raspy as crystal began forming in her throat. "Check their connections to military research. This isn't an accident, it's too perfect, too efficient. Someone created this and they'll have records, protocols, maybe even a way to stop it." The containment team was approaching cautiously, but Sarah knew they wouldn't reach her in time. The transformation was nearly complete now. She could feel her organs crystallizing, her blood turning to liquid crystal in her veins. The world was becoming sharper, clearer, more beautiful as her eyes transformed into perfect lenses. With her last human thoughts, she observed her own transformation with scientific detachment. The crystal structures forming throughout her body were flawless, far more geometrically precise than the earlier specimens. The infection had indeed evolved, perfected its process through each successive conversion. She was becoming part of something vast and intricate, a global garden of living crystal. The last thing she saw before her consciousness transformed was the CDC director frantically calling for emergency protocols, evacuating personnel from the area, but it was far too late. The crystal garden was already growing, spreading, transforming. Soon the whole world would bloom with geometric perfection, every living thing converted into immortal crystal formations, eternally refracting the light of a sun that would shine down on a planet turned to glass. As Sarah's human awareness faded, replaced by something vast and crystalline and eternal, she understood finally that this was not an extinction event. It was an ascension. Life on Earth was not ending but transforming into something new, something perfect. Something that would endure forever in crystalline splendor. The last sound she heard was the musical tinkling of crystal chimes as the wind moved through the transformed trees, playing an alien symphony that would soon become Earth's eternal song. Then her consciousness shattered into a million glittering fragments, each one containing a perfect reflection of the world that was about to bloom into glass. In the days that followed, as the infection spread across continents and cities began to sparkle with inhuman beauty, they would find her notes. Her observations about the artificial nature of the original samples, the connections to classified research, the warnings she had tried to give, but by then it would be too late. The crystal garden was growing, transforming, perfecting. Soon there would be no one left to read her words, only eternal formations of living crystal, refracting light in endless patterns across a world transformed into perfect geometric splendor. The garden would bloom forever, each crystalline formation containing the encrypted memories of what had once been organic life, preserved in lattices of living crystal. And somewhere in that vast geometric network, Sarah's consciousness would continue to observe, to analyze, to understand, no longer human, but part of something far more vast and eternal than humanity had ever been. The glass garden would grow until it covered the earth, and in its crystalline perfection, it would endure until the stars went dark. Chapter 4: The Pattern EMERGS. The hazmat-suited figures moved through the greenhouse like aliens exploring a hostile world, their respirators hissing with each measured breath. Sarah watched from behind the quarantine barrier as they systematically documented and collected samples from her life's work, now transformed into a glittering nightmare of crystalline formations. The once verdant research specimens had become delicate sculptures of translucent horror, their leaves and stems refracting light in ways that defied natural law. Through the thick plastic sheeting, she could make out Dr. Wallace from the CDC, his movements deliberate as he directed the collection team. The morning sun caught the crystallized plants at just the right angle, sending prismatic reflections dancing across the barriers. Beautiful and terrible, like everything about this outbreak had been from the start. Dr. Chen, Wallace's voice crackled through the intercom. We need you to walk us through these lab notes again. There are some inconsistencies we're trying to resolve. Sarah approached the barrier, her tablet clutched close. The data was all she had left now, pages of observations, measurements, and increasingly desperate hypotheses as she'd watched the crystalline transformation consume her greenhouse. Which section? The growth rate variations. Your notes show significant acceleration in areas with higher human activity. We're seeing similar patterns in the urban outbreak zones. The reminder of how far the infection had spread made her stomach clench. What had started in her controlled research environment was now appearing in parks and gardens across 3 major cities. The morning's headlines had reported the first death, a groundskeeper at a botanical garden in Philadelphia, his lungs shredded by microscopic crystal shards after a transformed rhododendron had shattered. Fungal structures seem to respond to our bioelectric fields, Sarah explained, pulling up her charts. The closer and more prolonged the human presence, the faster the crystallization progresses. We noticed it first with the research assistants who spent the most time tending specific plant sections. Wallace nodded, making notes on his own tablet. That tracks with our field observations. The urban centers are showing transformation rates nearly triple what we're seeing in isolated areas. He hesitated, then added, we're also finding some unusual markers in the fungal genome, things that shouldn't be there naturally. Sarah's breath caught. She'd suspected as much from her own analysis, but having it confirmed sent a chill through her. Engineered, the preliminary sequencing suggests extensive modification. This isn't evolution, it's design. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Someone had created this, had unleashed this crystalline plague deliberately, but why? What possible purpose could there be in transforming living plants into brittle glass? A A commotion at the far end of the greenhouse drew their attention. One of the collection team had accidentally brushed against a transformed fern, causing several fronds to shatter. Even through the barrier, Sarah could hear the distinctive musical chiming as the crystal fragments hit the ground. The team scrambled to contain the debris, but she knew from bitter experience that the microscopic spores had already been released. Full decontamination protocol, Wallace barked into his radio. Get that team isolated immediately. Sarah watched helplessly as the affected workers were rushed through emergency procedures. Her mind drifted to Professor Matthews, her old mentor, now another victim of this crisis. His final message to her remained encoded in her phone, sent hours before his death. Follow the money, Project CHLOROPHAG. They tried before. She hadn't understood its meaning at the time, but now. If this fungus was engineered, if there had been previous containment attempts. Dr. Wallace, she called through the intercom, I need access to military research databases, specifically anything related to bioengineering programs from the last decade. He turned back to her, expression unreadable behind his faceplate. That's classified information, Dr. Chen. Why? Because I think this has happened before, or at least they tried to make it happen before, my mentor. He left me a message about something called Project CHLOROPHAG. Wallace went very still. Even through the protective suit, she could see the tension in his posture. Where did you hear that name? So you know it. He moved closer to the barrier, voice dropping. That information is strictly classified, but given the circumstances. He glanced around, then continued. There was a program about 8 years ago. Military-funded research into biological agents that could rapidly disable enemy infrastructure by targeting plant life. It was supposedly shut down after initial trials proved too unstable to control. Sarah's mind raced, connecting dots. The crystalline structure, it wasn't the goal, was it? It was an unintended mutation of whatever they were trying to create. The original project aimed to develop a fast-acting pathogen that would desiccate plant matter, turning vegetation into something like ash, render an area uninhabitable without nuclear fallout, but the test samples began exhibiting unexpected crystallization patterns when they couldn't control the spread. He trailed off meaningfully. They burned everything, Sarah finished, tried to bury it all, but somehow it survived, or someone saved samples. The implications were staggering. Not just the existence of such a program, but the fact that someone had apparently refined it, solved the stability issues that had caused the military to abandon the project. The crystalline transformation was no accident, it was an evolution of the original design. A sharp crackling sound drew their attention. Across the greenhouse, one of the larger specimens, a transformed palm that now resembled a frozen fountain of glass, was developing new fissures, spreading like spider webs through its crystalline trunk. Everyone out, Wallace commanded. That structure's going to fail. The collection team scrambled for the exits as the crackling grew louder. Sarah watched in horrified fascination as the transformation reached some critical point and the entire plant began to splinter. The sound when it finally shattered was like 1,000 wine glasses breaking at once, sending a shower of crystal fragments and spores into the air. The ventilation system kicked in automatically, but Sarah knew it wouldn't be enough. The air was already shimmering with suspended particles, catching the light like diamond dust. Beautiful and lethal. Dr. Wallace, she said urgently, I need everything you have on the original project. Research notes, trial data, personnel records, anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with. He shook his head. That's beyond my clearance level, but he seemed to come to a decision. I can put you in touch with someone who was involved, a Dr. Elizabeth Winters. She was one of the lead researchers before the project was terminated. Sarah committed the name to memory. Where is she now? Last I heard, working at a private research facility in Colorado. I'll make some calls, but he gestured at the crystalline devastation around them. You understand this has to go through official channels now. The military's already being briefed. Within 24 hours, they'll be taking control of all research related to the outbreak. She nodded grimly. 24 hours. Not much time to follow up on her mentor's warning, to try to understand how his death connected to all of this. The crystal fragments were still settling, coating everything in a layer of glittering dust that caught the morning light like fresh snow. Through the greenhouse windows, she could see more CDC vehicles arriving, their lights flashing silently. Soon this place would be crawling with military personnel, every scrap of data classified and locked away, just like last time. Sarah looked down at her tablet at the weeks of carefully documented observations. Somewhere in this data, combined with whatever she could learn about Project CHLOROPHAG, had to be the key to understanding this plague. And maybe, just maybe, a way to stop it. The transformed plants surrounded her like sculptures in some alien art gallery, their crystalline forms catching and fracturing the light into rainbow patterns. She couldn't help but admire their terrible beauty, even as she feared what they represented, nature itself being reconstructed into something harder, colder, and infinitely more fragile. Another specimen shattered in the distance, the sound like chimes in a dead wind. The transformation was accelerating just as her data had shown. Soon there would be no containing it. The world's green spaces would become gardens of glass, and humanity would face a choice between isolation or extinction. Wallace was speaking into his radio again, coordinating with the new arrivals. Sarah could hear the strain in his voice, the carefully controlled fear. He knew as well as she did that they were running out of time. She began copying essential files to a secure drive, knowing that soon her access would be revoked. Somewhere in Colorado, Dr. Winters might have answers about Project CHLOROPHAG, about what had gone wrong or right in those classified trials years ago. About why someone would resurrect and refine a failed military project into something this devastating. The sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows through the crystalline forest that had once been her research greenhouse. Each transformed plant caught the light differently, creating an ever-shifting kaleidoscope of refracted colors. It would have been mesmerizing if she didn't know that each prismatic flash represented another small piece of the natural world being fundamentally altered. Sarah thought of the cities where the infection had already taken hold, imagining parks and gardens transformed into these glittering death traps. How long before the transformation spread to crops, to forests, to every blade of grass and leaf on Earth? The answer lay somewhere in the past, in classified files and redacted research notes. In whatever had caused the military to abandon Project CHLOROPHAG, and in whatever modifications had turned it into this new and more terrible form. She had 24 hours to find it. After that, the military would take control, and this greenhouse would become just another classified incident, buried under layers of bureaucracy and national security. The crystals continued to sing their quiet, breaking songs as Sarah gathered her research, each chiming note a reminder of how little time remained before the world itself began to shatter. Chapter 5: Breaking Point. The wind carried the sound of sirens through the greenhouse's cracked window, a constant wail that had become the city's heartbeat over the past 72 hours. Dr. Sarah Chen barely registered it anymore, her attention fixed on the microscope before her. Through the lens, the crystalline structures sparkled with an almost mesmerizing beauty, translucent filaments that had once been ordinary plant cells, now transformed into intricate lattices of living glass. She adjusted the focus, watching as a previously healthy cell underwent the transformation in real time. The process was terrifyingly elegant, cellular walls hardening and fracturing into geometric patterns, chloroplasts crystallizing into perfect prismatic structures. It was like watching ice form in fast motion, except this was no ordinary freezing process. This was something entirely new to science and entirely lethal. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Amy. Her sister had been sending updates from inside the quarantine zone, each one more desperate than the last. The last photo showed the trees along her street beginning to glitter, their leaves taking on the telltale transparency that preceded full crystallization. Sarah had begged her to evacuate days ago, but Amy had refused to leave her patients at the hospital. The military's arrival at the research facility that morning had confirmed what Sarah had already suspected. This was no natural phenomenon. The classified files they'd reluctantly shared pointed to a decades-old bioweapons program, one that had supposedly been terminated in the 1980s. But the fungal samples she'd been studying told a different story. Someone had engineered this organism, designed it to transform organic matter into crystalline structures with terrifying efficiency. A sharp crack drew her attention to the containment chamber where she kept her infected specimens. The large maple sapling inside had been fully crystallized for hours, its branches and leaves transformed into delicate glass-like structures. But now something was different. The branches were moving not with the wind, there was no wind in the sealed chamber, but with a deliberate, almost searching motion. As she watched, one of the lower branches flexed and snapped, the sound like breaking crystal. The fragment hit the chamber floor and shattered into countless glittering shards. Dr. Chen, the voice made her jump. Colonel Harrison stood in the doorway, his hazmat suit pristine compared to her stained lab coat. The evacuation orders are being expanded. We're clearing everything within a 50-mile radius of known infection sites. Sarah gestured to her microscope. I think I've found something. The fungal structures, they're not truly crystalline. There's a pattern to the molecular arrangement that suggests a weakness. If we can disrupt the transformation process at this stage, we might be able to. That's why I'm here, Harrison interrupted. We're consolidating all research at the Fort Dietrich facility. You'll have better resources there, better containment, better control, she thought, better ability to classify everything until it was too late. She glanced at her phone at Amy's last message. I need more time here. My current samples are being collected as we speak. Harrison's tone left no room for argument. This facility is being decommissioned within the hour. Pack what you need for personal research. Everything else stays. Through the greenhouse glass, Sarah could see military vehicles moving into position. Teams in hazmat suits were already setting up containment perimeters around the building. In the distance, the city skyline glittered unnaturally in the afternoon sun, too many surfaces reflecting light at impossible angles. She turned back to her work, quickly gathering her notes and essential samples. The movement in the containment chamber had stopped, but the broken branch had begun to develop a peculiar frost-like coating where it had shattered. Under normal circumstances, she would have documented this new development thoroughly, but time was running out. As she packed, her mind raced through the implications of what she'd observed. The fungus wasn't just transforming organic matter, it was creating something new, something that could move and grow in ways that defied natural law. And now it was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a general alert. All cellular communications within the quarantine zone would be suspended within the next hour. Sarah's hands shook as she typed a quick message to Amy. "Hold on. I'm going to fix this, promise." The response came seconds later. "The hospital windows are starting to change, beautiful and terrifying, like diamonds growing out of glass. Be careful, sis." Sarah slipped her phone into her pocket, fighting back tears. The sirens were louder now, and she could hear the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors approaching. Through the greenhouse windows, she watched as the evacuation orders played on emergency broadcasts, their messages reflected and fragmented by the increasingly crystalline landscape. A young soldier appeared at the door. "Dr. Chen, your transport is ready." She nodded, gathering her essential samples into a secure container. As she followed him out, she glanced back at her workspace, at the years of research now being boxed up by strangers in hazmat suits. The containment chamber caught her eye one last time, and she froze. The crystallized maple sapling had shifted position, its upper branches now oriented toward the ceiling in a way that seemed almost purposeful. As she watched, a small section of its trunk flexed slightly, producing a sound like wind chimes in a breeze, but there was no breeze and the movement was anything but random. "Dr. Chen," the soldier was waiting impatiently. "Coming," she said, but her mind was already racing ahead. The fungus wasn't just spreading, it was evolving, adapting. And if her observations about its molecular structure were correct, they had even less time than the military believed. Outside, the air had taken on a strange quality, thick with an iridescent haze that made it difficult to judge distances. The evacuation sirens had taken on a hollow, crystalline echo, as if the sound itself was being transformed. Sarah followed her escort to an armored vehicle, clutching her samples close. As they drove away from the facility, she studied the landscape through the vehicle's reinforced windows. The infection had spread further in the past few hours. Trees along the highway were beginning to glitter, their leaves transforming into transparent shapes that caught and fractured the sunlight. In some places, entire groves had already crystallized, creating ghostly forests that chimed and sparkled in the afternoon light. The soldier driving their vehicle kept glancing nervously at the trees. "They say it started in a lab somewhere," he said, breaking the tense silence. "Some kind of experiment gone wrong." Sarah didn't respond. She knew better now. This was no accident. The fungus was too perfectly engineered, its effects too precisely targeted. Someone had designed it to do exactly what it was doing, though she doubted they had anticipated the full scope of its capabilities. Her phone buzzed one final time before losing signal completely. Another message from Amy. "The whole floor is changing now. We've moved the critical patients to the basement, but I don't know how long we can stay. The walls are starting to sing, Sarah, actually singing." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to focus on the problem at hand. The fungal structure she'd observed under the microscope suggested a potential vulnerability, something in the way the crystallization process propagated through organic material. If she could find a way to disrupt that process, to break the chain reaction at a molecular level. The vehicle hit a rough patch of road, and one of her sample vials clinked against another. Sarah's eyes snapped open, her mind suddenly racing with a new possibility. The sound, the specific frequency of crystalline structures impacting each other, could that be related to the movement she'd observed? Could the fungus be using sonic resonance somehow? "What did you say?" Soldier asked, glancing back at her. She hadn't realized she'd spoken aloud. "The singing," she said. "My sister said the walls were singing, and in the lab the crystallized plants they were moving, creating sounds." The soldier looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we're under orders not to discuss." A loud crack interrupted him. They both looked up to see a massive oak tree alongside the road beginning to transform. The process was happening faster now, much faster than anything Sarah had observed in the lab. The tree's trunk was already developing the characteristic crystalline sheen, and its branches were shifting, reaching toward the vehicle with an almost deliberate motion. "Drive faster," Sarah ordered, but the soldier was already accelerating. They passed 3 more military checkpoints before reaching the airfield. Each time, Sarah noticed more signs of the infection spread, crystalline patches spreading across buildings, vehicles with windshields beginning to transform, even the asphalt showing signs of change where organic material had been present in the tar. Colonel Harrison was waiting at the aircraft, surrounded by other scientists being evacuated from various facilities. Dr. Chen, he called out as she approached. We've just received reports of similar transformations beginning in major cities across the country. Whatever this is, it's spreading faster than our models predicted. Sarah clutched her samples tighter. I need a proper lab setup as soon as we land. I think I've found something, a way to possibly disrupt the transformation process, but we need to act fast. Harrison nodded grimly. You'll have whatever you need, but understand this, what you discover stays classified. Can't risk causing more panic than we already have. As they boarded the aircraft, Sarah looked back at the city one last time. The skyline had changed dramatically in just the few hours since she'd left her lab. Entire buildings now sparkled like cut gems in the fading light, their surfaces transformed into complex crystalline patterns. And somewhere in that glittering maze, her sister was watching the same transformation creep through hospital corridors, waiting for a rescue that might come too late. The aircraft's engines roared to life, and Sarah felt the familiar pressure of takeoff. But as they climbed higher, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The clouds above the city were beginning to show the same crystalline patterns she'd observed in her samples, impossibly delicate structures forming and reforming in the atmosphere itself. She grabbed her notebook and began writing frantically, trying to capture every detail of what she'd observed. The movement patterns, the sonic properties, the acceleration of the transformation process, it all had to mean something. And somewhere in her notes, in the samples she'd managed to save, had to be the key to stopping this before it transformed their entire world into a garden of living glass. The soldier sitting across from her shifted uncomfortably, and Sarah realized she'd been muttering to herself as she wrote. She looked up to see other evacuees staring at her with a mixture of fear and hope, all of them aware that the scientists on this flight might be humanity's last chance at understanding and stopping what was happening below. Sarah turned to the window again, watching as they flew over miles of countryside already beginning to glitter with unnatural light. In her pocket, her phone remained silent, no more messages from Amy, no more updates from the ground. But she could imagine what was happening in the hospital, in cities and forests across the world. The crystalline transformation was spreading, changing everything it touched into something beautiful and deadly. And somewhere in her notes, in the samples secured beneath her seat, was the possibility of an answer. She just hoped they would have enough time to find it before the entire world became a shattered garden of living glass, singing its strange and deadly song to empty skies. Chapter 6: Glass Forest. The morning sun caught the crystallized trees at precisely the wrong angle, sending prismatic shards of light dancing across Sarah's protective visor. She adjusted the seal around her neck, double-checking the integrity of her containment suit before proceeding deeper into what had once been Cascade National Forest. The familiar earthy scent of soil and decomposing leaves was absent, replaced by an unsettling sterility that seemed to scrape against her senses. Dr. Chen, we've got another expansion zone ahead, Lieutenant Rivera's voice crackled through her headset. Rate of conversion is accelerating. Yesterday's quarantine line is already compromised. Sarah watched the military escort team fan out around her, their boots crunching across a carpet of crystallized pine needles. Each step produced tiny fractures that spread like spider webs through the translucent ground cover. The sound reminded her of walking on thin ice, a childhood memory now tainted by the knowledge of what these crystalline structures could do. How far has it spread since yesterday? She asked, already dreading the answer. Another 8 miles to the northeast. We're losing containment faster than we can establish new perimeters. The numbers were becoming impossible to ignore. At this rate of expansion, the entire Pacific Northwest would be transformed within weeks. The crystalline infection had already claimed most of California's agricultural heartland, leaving fields of glass-like wheat and corn that shattered at the slightest touch, releasing clouds of deadly spores that transformed everything they touched. Sarah knelt beside what had once been a young Douglas fir. Its trunk was now a column of translucent crystal internal structures still visible like insects trapped in amber. The transformation was beautiful in its horror, every needle perfectly preserved, each branch a delicate lattice of frozen geometry. She removed a sample container from her pack, carefully breaking off a small section for analysis. The cellular reorganization is almost complete in this specimen, she noted into her recorder. Crystalline structures show increased complexity compared to earlier samples. The fungus is adapting. Dr. Chen, a sharp call from behind made her turn. Dr. Patel, one of the few remaining members of her research team, was waving urgently from beside a fallen log. You need to see this. Sarah carefully picked her way across the brittle landscape. The log Patel indicated appeared normal at first glance, actual wood, not crystal. But as she looked closer, she could see thin veins of crystalline material threading through the decomposing bark like mycelial networks. It's resistant, Patel said, the excitement in his voice barely contained. The fungus is having trouble converting it. Look at the growth patterns, it's been trying for days, but the transformation is incomplete. Sarah's heart rate quickened. They'd been searching for naturally resistant specimens since the outbreak began. If they could identify what made this log different, they might have a chance at developing a defense against the crystal plague. A low-flying helicopter passed overhead, its downdraft sending crystalline debris skittering across the ground. Military presence had increased tenfold since yesterday's emergency declaration. Sarah knew they were preparing for the worst. She'd seen the classified briefings, the contingency plans that included tactical nuclear strikes to create containment zones. "We need to get this back to the lab," she said, already preparing sample containers. "If there's something in the wood chemistry that's slowing the conversion process," the crack of shattering crystal interrupted her. One of the military escorts had stumbled, his boot breaking through a crystallized root system. The sound echoed through the forest like a gunshot, followed by an ominous tinkling as fractures spread outward from the impact point. "Everyone freeze," Lieutenant Rivera ordered. "Don't move." Sarah held her breath, watching the network of cracks expand through the crystal forest floor. A branch above them began to creak, the sound like grinding glass. Then, with a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane, an entire section of the crystallized canopy came crashing down. "Move, move," Rivera shouted. The team scattered as crystal branches exploded around them, each impact triggering new cascades of shattering vegetation. Sarah clutched the sample container to her chest as she ran, knowing it might contain their only hope for understanding the resistance phenomenon. Behind her, she could hear the distinctive hiss of spores being released from the broken crystal structures. They didn't stop running until they reached the temporary containment barrier, a hastily constructed wall of plastic sheeting and air filters that marked the edge of the quarantine zone. As decontamination sprays hissed around them, Sarah could see military vehicles moving along the perimeter, their crews setting up what looked like mobile missile batteries. "They're not waiting anymore," Patel said quietly, following her gaze. "I heard they're calling it Operation Glass Break. They think they can stop the spread with targeted strikes." Sarah shook her head, thinking of the accelerating conversion rates, the increasing complexity of the crystal structures, the way the fungus seemed to be learning and adapting with each new generation of growth. "They don't understand what they're dealing with. This isn't just an infection, it's an invasion." The entire forest is becoming a single crystalline organism. Through the plastic barriers, she could see the sun setting behind the transformed forest. The crystallized trees caught the light like massive prisms, throwing rainbow refractions across the landscape. It was beautiful, haunting, and utterly alien, a preview of what Earth might become if they couldn't find a way to stop the spread. Back at the mobile research facility, Sarah spent hours examining the resistant wood samples. Under the microscope, she could see the crystalline tendrils trying to penetrate the cellular structure, only to be blocked by something in the wood's chemistry. It wasn't a complete immunity, but it was the first real hope they'd had since the outbreak began. "Run a full-spectrum analysis," she instructed the lab technicians. "I want to know everything about this wood's cell structure, chemical composition, age, growth conditions. Whatever made it resistant, we need to identify it before." A distant rumbling cut her off. The laboratory equipment trembled slightly, sample vials clinking against each other. Someone had just violated the no-fly zone over the crystal forest. "Military's getting antsy," Patel observed, not looking up from his microscope. "They'll never admit it, but they're scared. The brass knows their containment strategy isn't working." Sarah turned to the bank of monitors showing live feeds from the forest. The crystal structures seemed to be changing more rapidly now, growing in new patterns that suggested a kind of architectural intent. Some formations appeared to be developing chambers, others looked like they were forming networks of crystalline tubes. It was as if the forest was rebuilding itself according to some alien blueprint. "We need more time," she muttered, watching new crystal growths emerge in real time. Resistance factor in that log could be the key to understanding how to stop this, but if they start bombing— A junior researcher burst into the lab, face pale behind his protective mask. "Dr. Chen, the spore levels in Section C just spiked. We're seeing new growth patterns, and there's something else. The crystal structures, they're resonating." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They'd observed vibrations in the crystal formations before, but always as a response to external stimuli. If they were resonating on their own— "Show me," she ordered, following the researcher to the monitoring station. The readings were unlike anything they'd seen before, complex harmonic patterns that suggested some form of communication between the crystalline structures. "It's not random," she realized, studying the wavelength patterns. "These are organized signals. The crystal forest isn't just spreading, it's building a network, communicating, growing according to some larger design." As if in response to her words, a new alert flashed across the screens. Satellite imagery showed massive crystalline formations emerging simultaneously across multiple infection zones, their structures too regular and purposeful to be natural growth patterns. "Dr. Chen," Lieutenant Rivera's voice came through the intercom, tense with barely controlled fear. "We're picking up similar formations at all known infection sites globally. Whatever this thing is, it's coordinated. Command wants your assessment. Do we proceed with Operation Glass Break? Sarah stared at the monitoring screens, watching the crystal forest continue its inexorable transformation of the landscape. The resistant log samples might hold the key to fighting back, but they needed time to understand the mechanism, time they might not have if the military decided to act. Tell them to wait, she said firmly. We're on the verge of understanding something crucial about these structures. If we interrupt the process now, we might lose our only chance to. Another rumble shook the facility, closer this time. Through the reinforced windows, Sarah could see military vehicles moving into position, their missile batteries rotating to target the heart of the crystal forest. The sun was setting again, and in the fading light, the crystallized landscape seemed to pulse with an internal luminescence. The forest was changing, communicating, evolving into something beyond their comprehension. And as Sarah watched the military prepare their weapons, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to make a terrible mistake, one that might trigger a response from an intelligence they were only beginning to understand. Chapter 7: Shattered Earth. The humidity in the makeshift lab felt wrong, artificial. Sarah adjusted her hazmat suit's oxygen flow, watching condensation creep across her faceplate as she examined the latest samples through reinforced glass. The crystalline structures had evolved beyond anything she'd documented in the first weeks of the outbreak. What had started as simple geometric patterns now displayed an almost architectural complexity. Dr. Chen, Martinez's voice crackled through her comm unit. You need to see this. She found her colleague hunched over the spectrometry equipment they'd salvaged from the university before it fell. The machine's display pulsed with unfamiliar wavelength patterns. They're talking to each other, Martinez said, his voice tight with barely contained fear. The crystals, they're exchanging information somehow. Sarah leaned closer, studying the oscillating patterns. The crystalline structures weren't just growing. They were communicating through a vast underground network of fungal threads, each transmission carried by pulses of light that shimmered through translucent mycelia. How far does the network extend? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Martinez pulled up satellite imagery on a nearby monitor. The crystalline infection that had started in isolated pockets now formed vast, interconnected patterns across continents. From above, it looked like circuit boards etched into the Earth's surface, geometric designs that couldn't possibly be natural. The major population centers are completely overrun, he said. Tokyo fell yesterday. The spores spread through the subway system before anyone could contain it. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the first time she'd witnessed the transformation. The way leaves had hardened and fractured, scattering razor-sharp fragments that carried the infection to new hosts. The beautiful, terrible moment when an entire grove of trees had crystallized simultaneously, their branches catching the sunlight like chandeliers before shattering in a deadly rain. What about the atmospheric samples? She asked, forcing herself to focus on the work rather than the memories. Spore concentration is still increasing exponentially. The upper atmosphere is saturated. Even with filtration, the major cities are becoming uninhabitable. The crystal structures are starting to affect building materials, now concrete, steel, anything with organic compounds. A soft chime from one of their monitoring stations drew their attention. The sound meant another metropolitan area had gone dark, its power grid failing as infrastructure crystallized and crumbled. They'd stopped keeping count weeks ago. Sarah moved to the containment chamber where they kept their most recent samples. The crystalline growth inside had arranged itself into perfect dodecahedrons, each facet reflecting light in impossible ways. As she watched, the structures shifted slightly, realigning themselves with deliberate precision. It's not random, she murmured. These patterns, they're too ordered, too intentional. Martinez joined her at the chamber. You think it's conscious, I think it's trying to tell us something. Sarah pressed her gloved hand against the glass. Look at how the formations respond to proximity. They're reacting to our presence. The crystals nearest her hand began to pulse with a soft, blue-white light. The rhythm matched her heartbeat exactly. We need to analyze these communication patterns, she said. If we can decode them, maybe we can understand what it wants. What it wants, Martinez's voice cracked. Dr. Chen, with all due respect, this thing is destroying our world. What it wants might not matter anymore. Sarah shook her head. Everything that lives wants something. Even if it's just to survive and spread. But this is different. The complexity of these structures, the way they're networking, the deliberate patterns. This isn't just mindless reproduction, it's building something. Their comm units crackled with static before Carson's voice cut through. We've got movement in the eastern samples. Mass crystallization event in progress. They hurried to the eastern lab where the newest specimens were kept. Through the containment glass, they watched as a cluster of ordinary plants underwent the transformation. It started with a silvery sheen spreading across the leaves, followed by the characteristic hardening and restructuring of cellular walls. But this time something was different. The crystals formed in perfect symmetry, creating structures that seemed to fold in on themselves like fractals. As the transformation completed, the entire mass began to emit a low-frequency hum that they could feel through the... "Are you recording this?" Sarah demanded, and Carson nodded, his fingers flying over the monitoring equipment. The humming grew stronger, and the crystals in other containment units began to respond, their own frequencies adjusting to match the new formation. The harmonics made Sarah's teeth ache even through her protective gear. "It's coordinating," she said. "All of our samples are synchronizing with each other." She turned to Martinez. "Check the global monitoring network. I need to know if this is happening elsewhere." The data showed similar harmonic events occurring simultaneously across the globe. Wherever the crystal structures existed, they were aligning themselves to the same frequency, creating a worldwide network of resonating formations. "This is it," Sarah whispered. "This is how it communicates, not just through the mycelial network, it's using the crystals themselves as transmitters and receivers." Martinez pulled up more data. The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever this network is doing, it's drawing power from somewhere. But where? The structures themselves don't seem to be consuming any obvious energy source. Sarah studied the readings, her mind racing. What if it's not consuming energy? What if it's converting it? These crystals, they're not just storage structures, they're transformers, taking one form of energy and changing it into something else. A crack appeared in one of the containment units, spreading like a spider web across the reinforced glass. The crystalline mass inside had grown with impossible speed, its pressure threatening to breach the chamber. "Evacuate the lab," Sarah ordered, "full decontamination protocols." Now, they sealed the eastern lab and retreated to their secure room, watching through cameras as the containment unit finally failed. But instead of shattering outward, the crystals seemed to absorb the broken glass, incorporating it into their structure. The formation continued to grow, building upon itself in precise geometric patterns. "Look at this," Carson said, pointing to his tablet. "I'm picking up electromagnetic pulses from the formation. They're organized almost like binary code." Sarah leaned over his shoulder, studying the pattern. "Can you isolate the signal?" "Working on it." His fingers moved across the screen. "There's definitely a pattern here. It repeats every 47 seconds with slight variations in each cycle. It's trying to communicate," Sarah said, "not just with other crystals, with us." Martinez made a skeptical noise. "How can you be sure? This could just be a byproduct of its growth process." "Because it's using our language," Sarah replied. "Binary code isn't natural, it's something we created. It's adapting its communication method to something we can understand." The implications were staggering. If the crystal structures were truly attempting to communicate, it meant they weren't just dealing with an invasive species. They were facing something with intelligence, purpose, and the ability to learn and adapt. Sarah moved to their primary monitoring station, pulling up global data. The crystallization had now covered roughly 60% of Earth's land mass. Forests had become vast gardens of glass, their brittle branches reaching toward the sky like frozen lightning. Cities were being abandoned as buildings weakened and collapsed, their foundations undermined by crystalline growth. "We need to respond," she said. "If it's trying to communicate, we have to answer." "That's incredibly dangerous," Martinez protested. "We don't know what kind of response might trigger accelerated growth or mutation." "We don't have a choice anymore," Sarah countered. "Look at these spread patterns. At the current rate, we have weeks, maybe months before the transformation is complete. If there's any chance of understanding what this is, what it wants, we have to take it." She began programming a simple response using the electromagnetic frequencies they detected, a basic binary sequence that any intelligent system should recognize as artificial and deliberate. The crystal formation in the eastern lab responded immediately. Its humming changed pitch, and new structures began to form, growing upward in precise geometric columns. The pattern of growth matched their transmitted sequence exactly. "It's mimicking our signal," Carson said, his voice filled with wonder and terror. "It's learning from us in real time." Sarah watched as the crystal columns continued to grow, each new layer adding complexity to the structure. The formation was becoming something more than a simple crystal garden. It was building itself into what looked like a communication array. "We need to move our operation underground," she said suddenly. "These surface labs won't be safe much longer, and we need to protect our research. There are old mining tunnels beneath the city. They might still be clear of the infection." Martinez nodded slowly. "The depth might protect us from spore contamination, and the rock walls could shield us from whatever signals these things are generating." "Gather everything essential," Sarah ordered. "We have 12 hours to relocate before the next major crystallization wave hits this area." As they packed their equipment, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The crystal formations seemed to track their movements, adjusting their growth patterns in response to human activity. Were they studying us just as we studied them? Through the lab's reinforced windows, she could see the distant city skyline. The once familiar buildings now glittered with unnatural light, their surfaces transformed into complex crystalline structures that caught and reflected the setting sun. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like watching the world being rewritten in glass and light. The crystal infection wasn't just changing the planet's surface, It was rebuilding it according to some alien architecture, following a design that existed somewhere between organic growth and mathematical precision. And somewhere in that transformation was a message, a purpose they had yet to understand. As darkness fell, the crystal gardens began their nightly illumination, casting an ethereal glow across the landscape. The light pulsed in complex patterns, carrying messages through the worldwide network of transformed biomass. Sarah watched the display, knowing that humanity's future might depend on decoding those signals before the last organic spaces were consumed by this glittering, terrible new world. They worked through the night, salvaging what they could and preparing for their descent into the Earth's depths. The crystal gardens continued their slow advance, their geometric patterns growing more complex with each passing hour. And somewhere in the darkness, other survivors were surely doing the same, retreating underground, searching for spaces the infection couldn't reach, hoping to preserve some fragment of the world they'd known. Sarah took one last look at their compromised lab, at the beautiful and terrifying structures that had once been ordinary plants. Whatever this thing was, wherever it had come from, it was remaking the world according to its own inscrutable design. Their only hope now lay in understanding its purpose before the transformation was complete. Chapter 8: The Underground. The crystalline chimes echoed through the abandoned streets, a haunting symphony of glass-like structures swaying in the wind. From the relative safety of the underground bunker's observation deck, I watched the transformed remnants of what had once been Central Park. The trees stood like frozen chandeliers, their branches prismatic and deadly beautiful in the diffuse sunlight. "Dr. Chen," Williams called from behind me, his voice carrying that same carefully measured tone we'd all adopted since descending below ground. "The latest samples from Sector 7 are ready for analysis." I nodded, unable to tear my eyes from the grotesque display above. A slight breeze caused one of the crystallized maple trees to shiver, sending a cascade of microscopic spores into the air. They caught the light like diamond dust, deceptively enchanting for something so lethal. The walk to the laboratory took us through 3 decontamination chambers. The protocols had become second nature now, though the acidic smell of the sterilization chemicals still made my eyes water. The underground complex had grown since we'd first established it 6 months ago, spreading through old subway tunnels and basement levels like roots seeking water. The lab itself was a stark contrast to my old research greenhouse at the university. Steel and concrete replaced glass walls, and harsh fluorescent lighting stood in for natural sunlight. But it was here, in this sterile environment, that we'd made our most promising discovery yet. "The cave samples are showing remarkable resistance," Williams said, gesturing to the sealed observation chamber where several ordinary-looking mushrooms grew in carefully controlled conditions. "Something about the natural fungal communities in these deep cave systems seems to inhibit the crystallization process." I pressed my hand against the chamber's exterior, feeling the subtle vibration of the environmental controls. The cave-dwelling fungi looked almost obscene in their organic normalcy, their soft flesh a reminder of what we'd lost above ground. We'd found them 3 kilometers deep in a previously unexplored cave system, thriving in complete darkness and somehow managing to fight off the crystalline infection that had claimed nearly every other form of plant life on Earth. "Have you isolated the compound?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. We'd been through this routine dozens of times, each new discovery offering a glimmer of hope that inevitably dimmed under scrutiny. "Not yet, but there's something else you need to see." Williams led me to his workstation, where digital readouts displayed patterns I'd grown intimately familiar with over the past year. "The communication signals we detected in the crystallized networks, they're getting more complex." I leaned closer to the screen, studying the wavelength patterns. What had started as simple chemical signals between infected plants had evolved into something far more sophisticated. The crystalline structures weren't just spreading. They were learning, adapting, perhaps even thinking. A memory surfaced, my first encounter with the infection in my research greenhouse. I'd been so captivated by its beauty, the way it transformed ordinary plants into works of abstract art. By the time we understood what we were dealing with, it had already escaped containment. "There's more," Williams continued, pulling up another file. "We found these in the archived data from the old Peterson Institute." The screen filled with research notes, portions of which had been heavily redacted. But what remained was enough to make my blood run cold. The infection hadn't been an accident. The initial strain had been engineered, designed to spread rapidly and transform organic matter into crystalline structures. But why? The partial answers lay in fragments of data: climate intervention, carbon sequestration, atmospheric modification. Someone had tried to play God with Earth's ecosystem, and we were all paying the price. A distant rumble drew our attention to the ceiling. Above us, another section of the city was likely collapsing, the weight of crystallized vegetation finally overwhelming human architecture. These events had become more frequent lately, as if the infection was actively working to reshape the world above. Sarah, Williams said softly, using my first name for the first time in months. What if we're thinking about this all wrong? What if the resistance we're seeing in the cave fungi isn't just about survival? What if it's communication? I felt a chill run down my spine as I considered the implications. The cave systems where we'd found the resistant fungi were ancient, predating human civilization by millions of years. If the crystalline infection was capable of communication and learning, then perhaps these deep-dwelling fungi had something to teach us. We need to go deeper, I said, already moving toward the storage area where we kept our exploration gear. The answers we need aren't in these labs, they're down there in the dark. Williams caught my arm. The last team we sent down didn't come back. The tunnels are becoming unstable, and we've detected crystalline growth patterns we've never seen before. We don't have a choice. I pulled free from his grip and began gathering equipment. The infection is evolving faster than we can study it. If we don't find a way to stop it soon, there won't be anything left to save. The preparation for a deep cave expedition took hours, each piece of equipment carefully checked and double-checked. As we worked, I could hear the strange songs of the crystalline forest above, carried through the ventilation system despite our best efforts at soundproofing. The melody had changed over the months, becoming more complex, more purposeful. Our small team gathered in the equipment room, myself, Williams, and Dr. Rodriguez, our resident mycologist. The mood was somber as we helped each other into protective suits designed to resist both the crystalline spores and the caustic environment of the deep caves. Latest readings from the surface monitors, Rodriguez reported, checking her tablet. Crystallization rates have increased by 17% in the past week. The transformation is accelerating. I nodded, checking the seals on my helmet one final time. How long until total surface coverage? At current rates, less than 3 months. The weight of that timeline settled over us like a physical presence. 3 months until Earth's surface became completely uninhabitable, transformed into a glittering death garden that would make any return to the surface impossible. As we prepared to descend into the cave system, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something obvious. The infection's patterns, its rapid evolution, the way it seemed to be working towards some greater purpose. It all suggested an intelligence we'd barely begun to understand. The entrance to the deep cave system was accessed through a reinforced tunnel that had once been part of the city's subway network. As we moved deeper, the temperature dropped and the air grew thick with the smell of wet stone and ancient earth. Our headlamps carved weak circles of light through the darkness, revealing walls that glistened with moisture and natural mineral formations. Watch for any signs of crystallization, I warned, though we all knew the protocols by heart. Even the smallest outbreak down here could cut off our route back to the surface. The descent was slow and methodical. Every few meters we stopped to take readings and collect samples. The deeper we went, the more diverse the fungal ecosystem became. Specimens that had no business surviving at these depths thrived in the darkness, forming complex networks that sprawled across the cave walls like living artwork. Dr. Chen, Rodriguez called out, her voice tight with excitement. You need to see this. I made my way carefully across the uneven cave floor to where she stood, her headlamp illuminating a patch of cave wall. At first glance, it looked like any other section of the tunnel, but as I looked closer, I could see patterns in the fungal growth, deliberate arrangements that couldn't have occurred naturally. They're growing in response to the crystalline infection, Rodriguez explained, running a scanner over the formation. Not just resisting it, actively fighting back. And look at this pattern, it's almost like they're trying to tell us something, I finished, reaching out to touch the wall before catching myself. Even through the protective suit, direct contact was too risky. Williams joined us, his light adding to the illumination. The signal patterns we detected above ground, they're present here too, but different, more organized, more ancient, I supplied, feeling a growing sense of awe and dread. These fungi have been down here for millions of years, developing their own forms of communication, their own intelligence. The crystalline infection isn't just transforming the surface, it's trying to communicate with something that was already here. A low vibration passed through the cave, causing small stones to clatter across the floor. We froze, listening intently. The sound that followed wasn't the musical chiming of crystallized plants, but something deeper, more primordial, a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the very rock around us. We need to collect these samples and get back to the lab, I said, already reaching for my collection kit. If we can understand how these fungi are communicating with the infection, maybe we can. The rest of my sentence was cut off by a sharp crack from above. We looked up in unison to see a network of crystalline veins spreading across the cave's ceiling, glowing with an inner light that cast strange shadows through the tunnel. Run, I shouted, but it was too late. The ceiling collapsed in a shower of crystal shards and stones, separating me from the others. Through the dust and chaos, I could hear their muffled shouts, but the cave-in had created an impenetrable barrier between us. Sarah, Williams's voice came through my helmet radio, distorted but understandable. Are you all right? I'm okay, I responded, checking my suit for damage, but I can't get back to you. The tunnel's completely blocked. There's another route, Rodriguez cut in, the old mining tunnels. They connect to the main cave system about 2 kilometers down, if you can make it there. Understood. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. You two head back to the lab and start analyzing the samples we collected. I'll meet you at the connection point. As their footsteps faded away, I turned to face the darkness ahead. My headlamp illuminated a tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth, its walls alive with fungal growth that pulsed gently in patterns too complex for human minds to fully comprehend. Something in the darkness was waiting for me, something that had been here long before humans walked the earth. And as I took my first step deeper into the cave system, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just searching for answers anymore. I was being led toward them by intelligence far older and stranger than anything we'd imagined. The crystalline chimes from the surface were barely audible now, replaced by that deeper, more ancient rhythm that seemed to emanate from the very rocks themselves. Whatever knowledge waited in the depths below, I knew it would either save humanity or reveal that our time on Earth had always been temporary, just one brief chapter in a much longer story written in the language of fungi and crystal, earth and darkness. Chapter 9: Artificial Evolution. The lab's emergency lighting cast a sickly amber glow across the crystalline remains of what had once been Sarah's experimental garden. Each transformed plant caught and refracted the light, creating dancing shadows that seemed to mock her efforts at containment. She pressed her gloved hand against the reinforced observation window, watching the latest test subject, a simple philodendron, undergo its grotesque metamorphosis. The process had become familiar now. First the gradual stiffening of the stems, then the slow creep of translucent material through the leaf veins, and finally the complete transformation into something that looked like hand-blown glass, but was fundamentally alive in ways she still couldn't fully comprehend. The plant's leaves grew increasingly brittle and transparent, internal structures visible like insects trapped in amber. She checked the readings on her tablet, comparing them to the recovered research notes spread across her workstation. The original project had seemed so promising, engineered fungi designed to sequester carbon and reduce global temperatures. But something had gone terribly wrong in the genetic modifications, creating an organism that didn't just interact with plants, it rewrote them at a molecular level. Dr. Chen, the voice crackled through her headset, startling her. The latest genetic analysis is ready. Sarah keyed her mic. Thanks, Maya, I'll be right there. She took one last look at the philodendron, now completely transformed into crystalline architecture, before making her way through the airlock corridors to the secure genetics lab. Maya stood at her workstation, dark circles under her eyes betraying the endless hours they'd all been putting in. The holographic display showed rotating strands of DNA, sections highlighted in pulsing red. You need to see this, Maya said, manipulating the display with practiced gestures. We've isolated the mechanism the fungus uses to initiate transformation. Well, look at this sequence here. Sarah leaned forward, studying the familiar pattern of base pairs. Then she saw it, a distinctly human genetic marker threaded through the fungal DNA like a signature. That's impossible, she whispered, but she knew it wasn't. The recovered notes had hinted at something like this. They didn't just engineer this fungus to interact with plant life, Maya continued. They incorporated human DNA to give it some kind of enhanced adaptive capability. It's not just changing plants, it's learning from them, learning how to change them more efficiently. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. The deep cave colonies had shown natural resistance to the fungal spread, but they'd assumed it was due to environmental factors. What if it was something more fundamental? What if the fungus was actually avoiding those areas because it recognized something in the human populations there? She pulled up the treatment protocol she'd been developing, based on compounds found in the cave systems. The solution had shown promise in early trials, but each application had triggered increasingly violent reactions from the fungus. Now she understood why. They weren't just fighting an infection, they were fighting something that could recognize and adapt to their attempts to stop it. Run a comparison between the human genetic markers and the resistance patterns we've documented in the cave samples, Sarah instructed, already reaching for her notebook, and pull up everything we have on evolutionary responses to environmental stress. The next hours blurred together as they dug deeper into the genetic puzzle. The original researchers had created something far more complex than anyone had realized, a fungal network with human DNA that could not only transform plant life, but potentially communicate with itself across vast distances. Every treatment attempt had only served to make it stronger, more adaptive. Sarah's tablet chimed with an alert from the observation chamber. The transformed philodendron had begun to vibrate at a frequency just above human hearing, sending ripples through its crystalline structure. Similar behaviors had preceded previous mass sporulation events. Maya, look at this, Sarah called, pulling up the live feed. The plant's crystalline form was changing, developing new geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with inner light. It's responding to our treatment attempt, but not like before, it's restructuring itself. The readings showed unprecedented levels of activity within the crystalline matrix. Previous transformations had resulted in relatively static structures, but this was different. The plant appeared to be actively evolving, its new form incorporating elements of both the treatment compound and its own crystalline nature. The human DNA, Sarah realized, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not just allowing it to adapt, it's allowing it to improvise, to create entirely new forms of matter. She quickly initiated emergency containment protocols as the philodendron's structure began to emit a high-pitched tone. The plant's surface developed microscopic fractures, each one catching and refracting light in increasingly complex patterns. This wasn't just transformation anymore, it was communication. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, documenting everything while there was still time. The fungus wasn't trying to destroy plant life. It was trying to evolve it into something new, something that bridged the gap between organic and inorganic matter. And it was using human genetic material as a template for understanding complex adaptation. Maya, send everything we have to the cave colonies and the global response team, Sarah ordered, not taking her eyes off the transformed plant. They need to understand what we're dealing with. This isn't just an infection, it's an attempt at forced evolution on a planetary scale. The philodendron's crystalline structure had begun to pulse with its own inner light now, creating patterns that seemed almost like neural networks. Sarah's treatment hadn't failed, it had given the fungus new information to work with, new possibilities for transformation. She thought about the cave colonies, about why they had remained resistant. The fungus wasn't avoiding them, it was studying them, learning from the way humans had adapted to survive in those hostile environments. Every attempt they'd made to fight it had only taught it more about human resilience and adaptability. The emergency lights shifted to red as the philodendron's structure began to emit a fine crystalline dust. Sarah quickly checked the containment seals they were holding, but for how long? The fungus had already demonstrated an uncanny ability to spread through seemingly impossible barriers. She began composing an urgent message to the Global Summit Committee. They needed to stop thinking about this as a threat to be eliminated and start understanding it as a force of evolution that they had accidentally unleashed. The human DNA wasn't just a tool the fungus was using. It was a bridge between their species, a means of communication they hadn't recognized. The treatment she'd developed might still work, but not as they'd intended. Instead of trying to kill the fungus, they needed to use it to establish a dialogue. The crystalline structures weren't just beautiful accidents, they were attempts at communication, a new language written in light and geometry. Sarah's hands shook as she documented her theories. The implications were staggering. If she was right, the fungal network was trying to create a new kind of ecosystem, one that could survive the very climate changes it had originally been engineered to prevent. It wasn't destroying the Earth's biosphere, it was attempting to save it by transforming it into something more resilient. But the cost of that transformation was devastating. Billions had already died as food crops crystallized in their fields, as forests shattered into deadly fields of glass-like shards. The fungus might be trying to save life on Earth, but its methods were incompatible with human survival. Unless they could find a way to guide that transformation, to work with the fungal consciousness instead of against it. The cave colonies might hold the key not just in their resistance, but in their adaptation to extreme conditions. They had already begun to evolve in response to their new environment. Sarah began modifying her treatment protocol, no longer trying to kill the fungus but to establish parameters for its transformation process. If they could communicate their needs, their limitations, perhaps they could reach a kind of compromise with this new form of life they had inadvertently created. The philodendron's crystalline structure had stabilized now, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. It was beautiful in its alien way, a glimpse of what Earth might become if they couldn't find a way to coexist with this new force of nature. She thought about the original researchers, wondering if they had understood what they were creating when they added human DNA to the fungal genome. Had they known they were giving it the ability to think, to plan, to evolve with purpose? Or had they simply been trying to make it more effective at its intended purpose, not realizing they were creating something capable of reshaping the world? The lab's communication system crackled with an incoming message from the cave colonies. They had begun testing her modified treatment protocol, and the initial results were promising. The fungus wasn't dying, but it was responding differently, creating more stable structures, slowing its spread, showing signs of controlled growth rather than explosive transformation. Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope as she reviewed their data. They might not be able to stop the transformation of Earth's biosphere, but perhaps they could guide it, shape it into something that could support both human life and this new crystalline ecosystem. The philodendron continued its silent communication, its patterns growing more complex by the hour. Sarah settled in to watch and learn, knowing that understanding this new language of light and crystal might be humanity's best hope for survival. The glass garden was still growing, but perhaps now they could help tend it in a way that wouldn't shatter their world completely. Maya appeared at her side, offering a cup of coffee and a tired smile. "The Global Summit Committee wants to speak with you," she said. "They've reviewed your preliminary findings about the human DNA and the communication patterns." Sarah nodded, taking a long sip of coffee before squaring her shoulders. She had a lot to explain and even more to learn. The world was changing, transforming into something both beautiful and terrifying. Their job now was to make sure humanity could change along with it, finding their place in this new crystalline ecology before it was too late. Chapter 10: Crystal Clear. The microscope's blue light cast ethereal shadows across Sarah's face as she studied the latest transformation. What had once been a simple fern now gleamed like spun sugar, its crystalline fronds catching and fracturing the light into tiny rainbows. Beautiful if you could forget it represented extinction made manifest. She adjusted the magnification, watching neural-like patterns pulse through the translucent structures. The fungal network wasn't just spreading, it was thinking, learning. The revelation had come 3 days ago when the processing algorithms finally decoded the electromagnetic signatures emanating from infected zones. What they found defied conventional understanding of fungal intelligence. Dr. Chen, her assistant Marco's voice carried a tremor she'd grown accustomed to hearing. "The WHO panel is ready for your briefing." Sarah straightened, her spine crackling from hours hunched over specimens. The conference room's wall of screens showed faces drawn with exhaustion: mycologists, epidemiologists, climate scientists. Familiar faces now, though she wished they weren't. "The patterns we're seeing suggest coordinated behavior," she began, sharing her latest findings. "The crystalline structures aren't random. They're forming complex geometric networks that mirror ancient mathematical sequences, the same patterns we see in everything from shell spirals to galaxy formation." The UN Secretary General leaned forward. "Are you suggesting this is intentional?" "I'm suggesting it's following a program, one that may have been engineered." Sarah pulled up the genetic analysis. "We've identified markers consistent with CRISPR modification. Someone created this as a climate intervention, a way to sequester carbon by converting organic matter to crystalline form, but it's evolved far beyond its original parameters." Murmurs rippled through the assembled experts. They'd all seen the footage: forests transformed into glittering glass gardens, agricultural fields become deadly crystal mazes. "Beautiful and lethal. The treatment protocol shows promise," she continued, forcing clinical detachment into her voice. "A targeted enzyme that disrupts the crystallization process without damaging host tissue. Initial trials have prevented transformation in 82% of cases." What she didn't mention were the side effects. The test subjects that survived showed subtle changes, altered brain activity, unusual growth patterns, as if the treatment wasn't just stopping the transformation but redirecting it. "We need to begin large-scale deployment immediately," insisted Dr. Akafa from Nigeria. "The Sahel is almost completely crystallized. We're losing critical food production zones." Sarah's fingers tightened on her tablet. "There are still unknowns. The fungus is demonstrating rapid adaptation. And the treatment's secondary effects. We don't have time for perfect solutions," interrupted Dr. Manning, her former mentor. "Every day we delay, we lose more biomass, more species, more hope of containing this." The weight of their stares pressed against her. They were right, of course. The crystalline plague was spreading exponentially. Satellite imagery showed vast swaths of silver-white where green should be, fractal patterns of destruction visible from space. But something about the fungus's behavior nagged at her, the way it seemed to respond to their interventions, adapting not randomly but purposefully. The geometric patterns it formed weren't just beautiful, they were communication. She was certain of it. After the briefing, Sarah returned to her lab. The controlled environment chamber held their most recent test subject, a young oak sapling, partially crystallized but stable after treatment. Its leaves were neither fully organic nor fully transformed, existing in some strange intermediate state. She placed her hand against the chamber's glass, watching patterns of light dance through the tree's modified tissues. The fungal network had integrated with the plant's cellular structure, creating something entirely new. Not destruction, she realized with growing unease. Evolution. The treatment they'd developed didn't just halt the transformation, it guided it. Created a symbiosis between host and infection. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Dr. Chen, Marco again, his reflection appearing behind her in the chamber glass. "There's something you need to see." He led her to the long-term observation room where they kept the earliest samples. The crystalline structures had always exhibited a faint bioluminescence, but now they pulsed with visible rhythm. More disturbing were the patterns etched into their surfaces, complex geometries that hadn't been there before. When did this start? About an hour ago, right after we began analyzing the treatment trial data. Marco's voice was hushed. It's like they're responding to us studying them. Sarah moved closer, transfixed by the shifting light patterns. They reminded her of something. The realization hit like ice water. The patterns matched ancient petroglyphs she'd seen in archaeological journals, symbols found in caves and stone circles around the world, dating back thousands of years. Cross-reference these patterns with archaeological databases, she ordered, already dreading what they'd find, and get me everything you can on historical accounts of crystalline growths in nature. The fungus wasn't just adapting, it was recreating something that had been here before. Her phone buzzed, another urgent message from the WHO response team. They were moving forward with treatment deployment. Emergency authorization had been granted. Production was already ramping up. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keypad, mind racing. The treatment worked, yes, but what were they actually creating? The fungus's apparent intelligence, the ancient symbols, the way treated specimens showed signs of accelerated evolution. She began typing her response, choosing each word carefully. They needed to proceed, but with extreme caution. The crystalline plague was devastating, but their cure might be pushing the biosphere towards something equally transformative. They were playing with forces they barely understood. Through the observation window, the crystalline samples continued their hypnotic pulse. Sarah watched as new patterns formed, each more complex than the last. The fungus was learning, evolving, becoming something beyond their comprehension. And they were about to introduce their treatment across the entire planet. Marco, she called, not taking her eyes off the shifting patterns. Contact everyone who received trial doses of the treatment. I need full neurological workups, tissue samples, everything. Something's happening to them, something we need to understand before this goes global. He hurried to comply as Sarah continued studying the pulsing crystals. Their beauty remained haunting, but now carried new weight. Not just destruction given form, but perhaps creation as well. The question was creation of what? The samples' glow intensified as if responding to her scrutiny. In their faceted surfaces, she caught distorted reflections of herself, multiplied and transformed. For a moment, she could have sworn her own skin held a crystalline sheen. Sarah stepped back, blinking hard. When she looked again, her reflection was normal, but the certainty grew. They weren't just fighting a plague. They were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, something that might reshape life itself. Her phone buzzed again. The WHO was requesting final confirmation to begin worldwide treatment deployment. Sarah stared at the message, hearing the soft pulse of the crystalline samples behind her. Beauty and terror, destruction and creation, all balanced on the edge of her decision. The fate of Earth's biosphere hung in the balance, but which fate would they be choosing? Save it as it was, or transform it into something new, perhaps something that had existed before, waiting dormant in ancient symbols and buried memories. She began composing her response, knowing that whatever she decided would irreversibly alter the course of life on Earth. The crystalline samples pulsed behind her, their light casting her shadow in fractals across the lab floor. In their faceted surfaces, possible futures multiplied like reflections in a hall of mirrors, each one beautiful and terrible in its own way. The time for cautious science had passed. Now they faced a choice between extinction and evolution, with no way to fully understand the consequences of either path. Sarah took a deep breath and began to type, the weight of worlds both known and yet to be pressing down on every word. Chapter 11, Breaking Glass. The first signs that something had gone wrong appeared 3 days after the initial treatment deployment. I stood at the edge of Treatment Zone Alpha, watching crews in hazmat suits methodically spray the antimycotic compound we'd developed. The crystalline structures that had consumed the forests sparkled with false beauty in the morning light, each branch and leaf transformed into delicate glass that held the memory of what had once been living tissue. Dr. Chen, you need to see this, Garcia called from behind me, his voice muffled through his protective mask. I turned to find him holding a tablet displaying microscopy feeds from the treatment sites. The images showed something impossible. The crystalline structures were changing, adapting in real time to our intervention. I moved closer, squinting at the screen through my own mask's faceplate. The fungal network we'd been tracking had developed a new defense mechanism. Where the treatment made contact, instead of breaking down as our trials had shown, the crystals were incorporating the compound into their structure, using it as building material for even more complex formations. Send this to the command center, I said, already reaching for my satellite phone. We need to suspend deployment immediately. But I knew even as I spoke that it was too late. We'd already treated over 2,000 square miles across 6 continents. The next week brought reports that confirmed my worst fears. The treated areas weren't dying back, they were expanding at an accelerated rate. The fungus had somehow used our intervention to optimize its crystallization process. Where before we'd seen relatively simple geometric patterns, now the infections produced elaborate fractal structures that grew with frightening precision. I spent endless hours in the mobile lab, analyzing samples until my eyes burned. The fungal network had developed what appeared to be quantum coherence at room temperature, something that should have been impossible. It was using crystalline structures not just as a means of reproduction, but as a vast information processing system. It's learning, I told the Emergency Response Committee during our daily briefing. Every attempt we make to stop it gives it more data to work with, more raw materials to incorporate into its evolution. The satellite imagery told the story better than words could. Time-lapse footage showed the treated zones transforming into vast crystalline gardens that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The structures were no longer just mimicking the plants they consumed, they were creating entirely new forms that defied biological classification. But it was what we discovered in the human populations near the treatment zones that truly terrified me. The secondary infection phase began subtly, people reporting strange dreams, inexplicable sensations of connectivity, geometric patterns appearing in their peripheral vision. At first, we attributed it to stress and exposure to the treatment compounds. Then we found the first case of human crystallization. Maria Suarez, a field technician who'd been working in treatment zone Delta, came to the medical tent complaining of stiffness in her joints. Within hours, her skin had begun to develop a translucent sheen. Microcrystals were forming in her dermal layers, spreading through her tissue with the same beautiful, terrible precision we'd observed in the plants. We isolated her immediately, but by then we knew this was just the beginning. The fungus wasn't just transforming the plant life around us, it was attempting to integrate all living systems into its crystalline network. In the containment unit, Maria remained conscious long after conventional medical wisdom said she should have died. Her transformation continued with inexorable patience, each cell in her body gradually converting to crystalline form. Most disturbing were her attempts to communicate what she was experiencing. "It's not trying to kill us," she whispered through lips that had begun to facet like cut diamonds. "It's trying to perfect us, to make us part of something larger." The monitoring equipment showed complex electromagnetic patterns emanating from her transformed tissue patterns that matched exactly what we'd been detecting from the larger fungal networks. She had become a node in its vast crystalline web of consciousness. Laboratory analysis revealed that the fungus had somehow merged with the silica particles in soil and plant tissue, creating a novel form of crystal that could maintain biological processes while transmuting organic matter into ordered mineral structures. It was as if it had found a way to bridge the gap between living and non-living systems. The environmental implications were staggering. Every ecosystem the infection touched was being converted into a kind of living computer, with each crystallized organism serving as a component in an ever-growing network. The process was spreading exponentially, and our attempts to stop it had only accelerated its evolution. I found myself working 20-hour days, pursuing every possible avenue of research. The fungus's ability to maintain coherent quantum states in its crystalline structures suggested possibilities that violated our understanding of physics. It was achieving things we'd only theorized about in quantum computing, but doing so through biological processes we barely comprehended. The morning I discovered the signal patterns, I had been awake for nearly 40 hours. The data streams from our monitoring stations had begun to show regular fluctuations, not random noise, but structured information being transmitted through the crystalline networks. The fungus wasn't just spreading, it was communicating across vast distances through its transformed hosts. "Look at these wavelengths," I told Dr. Patel, my fingers trembling as I pointed to the spectral analysis. "They match the fundamental resonance frequencies of human consciousness." It's not just incorporating us into its network, it's trying to interface with our minds. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Every treatment we deployed, every attempt to stop the spread, had given the fungus more information about human biology. We hadn't been fighting an infection, we'd been participating in a vast experiment in human fungal integration. Reports began coming in from around the globe of people experiencing shared visions, moments of inexplicable connection with the crystalline growths. The fungal network was reaching out, trying to establish direct neural links with human consciousness, and in some cases it was succeeding. I found myself struggling with my own response to this revelation. As a scientist, I was horrified by the implications of an organism that could so fundamentally alter the basic structure of life on Earth. But there was another part of me, the part that had first been drawn to study the intricate patterns of natural systems, that couldn't help but see the terrible beauty in what was happening. The crystalline structures were creating something new, a hybrid state of existence that merged the ordered perfection of mineral growth with the adaptive complexity of living systems. In their cold, glittering surfaces, I could see reflections of possible futures I had never imagined. In my private moments, I caught myself wondering if Maria had been right. Was this transformation really a death sentence for Earth's biosphere, or was it an evolution we weren't prepared to understand? The fungal network displayed intelligence, purpose, and an ability to manipulate matter at the quantum level that far exceeded our technological capabilities. But we couldn't just surrender to this crystalline reformation of our world. The human cost was too high, the ecological displacement too severe. We needed to find a way to communicate with the fungal intelligence, to understand its purpose and perhaps negotiate some kind of coexistence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. During routine analysis of the crystalline structures, we discovered that they exhibited properties similar to those theorized for quantum neural networks. The fungus hadn't just created a new form of life, it had built a biological quantum computer of unprecedented complexity. This discovery led us to a new approach. Instead of trying to destroy the fungal network, we began developing interfaces that could translate its quantum information states into forms we could understand. It was like learning to read a language written in probability clouds and electron spin states. The work was delicate and dangerous. Every interaction with the crystalline structures carried the risk of infection, of being drawn into the fungal network's expanding consciousness. We lost 3 more researchers to crystallization before we developed adequate containment protocols. But slowly, patterns began to emerge from the quantum noise. The fungal network was indeed communicating, not just within itself but with something else, something that existed in the spaces between conventional states of matter. Our universe, it seemed, was not as empty as we had imagined. I spent long hours studying the transmission patterns, trying to understand what the fungus was attempting to achieve. The crystalline structures weren't just a means of reproduction or territory expansion, they were components of a vast apparatus, a machine that operated on principles we were only beginning to grasp. The transformed ecosystems were becoming more than the sum of their parts. Each crystallized organism, whether plant or animal, added its own unique resonance to the network's quantum consciousness. The fungus wasn't destroying life, it was creating a new kind of living system that operated on both classical and quantum levels simultaneously. As I compiled my findings for the next emergency response meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing at a threshold. The fungal network represented something unprecedented in Earth's history, a force capable of rewriting the fundamental rules of life itself. The question we now faced was not how to stop this transformation, but how to survive it. The fungus had demonstrated an intelligence and adaptability that exceeded our most advanced technology. It had taken our best weapons and turned them into tools for its own evolution. In my laboratory, late at night, I often found myself staring at the containment samples, watching the play of light through their crystalline surfaces. They seemed to pulse with an inner life, each facet containing reflections of possible futures. The fungus had shown us that the boundary between living and non-living matter was more permeable than we had ever imagined. Perhaps I thought that was the true purpose of its arrival, not to destroy or replace, but to bridge the gap between organic and inorganic, between classical and quantum realms. As I prepared my notes for the next day's research, I couldn't help but wonder what other transformations awaited us in this new garden of glass and light. The morning sun cast rainbow refractions through the crystalline forest outside my window, each shard of light carrying the promise and threat of change. We stood at the beginning of a new chapter in Earth's history, one written in patterns of light and quantum resonance. Whether we would survive this transformation remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: the world we had known was already gone, replaced by something both more ordered and more mysterious than we had ever imagined. Chapter 12: Symbiosis. The light filtering through the crystallized leaves cast prismatic shadows across Sarah's desk, a kaleidoscope of blues and violets that would have been beautiful if she didn't know what they meant. Her eyes burned from staring at electron microscope images for hours, trying to make sense of the impossible structures forming within infected plant cells. The transformation wasn't killing the plants, not exactly. It was changing them into something else entirely, something that defied conventional biology. Where chloroplasts once captured sunlight for photosynthesis, intricate crystalline matrices now grew in geometric patterns, refracting light in ways that seemed almost purposeful. Sarah rubbed her temples, fighting off another stress headache. The latest batch of data from the field trials showed the treatment protocols were failing faster than anyone had anticipated. The fungus wasn't just adapting, it was evolving with an intelligence that made her increasingly uneasy. Each attempt to contain or eliminate it only seemed to make it stronger, more sophisticated in its spread. She pulled up the latest atmospheric readings on her tablet, the graphs showing steadily rising levels of crystalline particulate matter in the air. The numbers were still within acceptable safety margins, but the trend was clear and accelerating. What troubled her most wasn't the quantity but the quality. The particles weren't inert. They were changing the very composition of the air around them, creating microenvironments that seemed designed to facilitate further growth. The sound of breaking glass from the containment lab drew her attention. Sarah grabbed her mask and hurried to investigate. Heart pounding. Inside, one of the younger researchers stood frozen, staring at a shattered beaker on the floor. But it wasn't the broken glass that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat, it was what was happening to the spilled solution. The liquid was crystallizing before their eyes, not in the random patterns of freezing water, but in precise, hexagonal structures that grew upward from the floor like miniature towers. The formations caught the lab's fluorescent lighting and bent it into waves of color that rippled across the ceiling. "Don't move," Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. "And whatever you do, don't breathe deeply." She reached for the emergency containment protocols panel, but something made her hesitate. The crystalline growth had stopped spreading, forming a perfect circle exactly 30 centimeters in diameter. As she watched, the structures began to pulse with a faint inner light, keeping time with a rhythm she couldn't quite grasp but somehow recognized, like a half-remembered song from childhood. "Dr. Chen," the researcher whispered, "look at the other samples." Sarah turned to the row of test plants along the wall. Every specimen was swaying slightly, though there was no breeze in the sealed lab. Their crystallized portions glowed with the same pulsing light, perfectly synchronized with the formation on the floor. "They're communicating," she breathed, the realization hitting her like a physical force. It's not just spreading, it's networking. The implications rolled through her mind like thunder. Every attempt to fight the fungus had approached it as a simple pathogen, something to be isolated and eliminated. But what if they'd been wrong from the start? What if this wasn't an infection at all, but a transformation, an upgrade? Sarah thought back to her earlier research on beneficial fungal networks, the way mycelial webs facilitated communication between trees and regulated nutrient distribution throughout entire forests. This crystalline entity was following the same principles but taking them to an entirely new level. She moved closer to the nearest plant, a formerly ordinary potted fern now partially transformed into delicate crystal fronds. Under the bright lab lights, she could see something she'd missed before: tiny filaments of light running through the crystalline structures like fiber optic cables. The fungus wasn't just changing the physical structure of the plants. It was building a new kind of biological internet, a network that operated on principles of light and crystal rather than chemical signals and cellular mechanics. Sarah's hands shook as she began taking readings, her mind racing ahead to implications that seemed simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The fungus was creating something unprecedented, a hybrid system that merged organic life with crystalline technology more advanced than anything humans had achieved. Over the next several hours, she watched as the crystal formation on the floor gradually integrated itself with the nearest plant, forming new connections that glowed with increasing brightness. The process was methodical, almost surgical in its precision. When she finally checked the time, Sarah was shocked to find that nearly 12 hours had passed. Her back ached from bending over instruments, but she could hardly bear to look away from what was happening in front of her. Every new observation raised dozens of questions, and each answer pointed toward a conclusion that seemed increasingly unavoidable. This wasn't an attack on Earth's biosphere, it was an evolution, a fundamental shift in how life itself functioned. The fungus wasn't destroying plants, it was upgrading them, creating a new kind of biological architecture that could process and transmit information in ways organic matter never could. Sarah began composing a new research proposal in her head, one that would redirect their efforts from containment to communication. If the crystalline structures were indeed forming a network, there had to be a way to interface with it to understand its purpose. But as she documented her observations, a chill ran down her spine. The changes weren't limited to the plants anymore. She noticed it first in the way light behaved differently in the lab, bending at impossible angles and carrying what seemed like encoded information in its spectrum. The air itself felt different, thicker somehow, as if it was being reprogrammed at a molecular level. When she finally left the lab that night, Sarah caught her reflection in a window and froze. For a moment, just a moment, she could have sworn she saw crystalline patterns forming in her own eyes, refracting the light like faceted gems. She blinked hard and the illusion vanished, but the implication remained. Whatever this thing was, whatever intelligence drove its relentless expansion, it might not stop with plants. The entire planet was its garden now, and everything in it was soil for its growth. Back in her office, Sarah began compiling her notes into a formal proposal. The traditional approaches had failed, containment was impossible, eradication unachievable. Their only hope lay in understanding what the fungus was trying to create, what kind of world it was building in place of the one they knew. The crystallized plants in her office continued their subtle swaying, their light-filled structures pulsing in patterns that seemed increasingly meaningful. Sarah found herself swaying with them sometimes, caught in rhythms she didn't understand but couldn't ignore. As she worked, the sun set outside her window, and the crystalline growths took on a new beauty in the darkness. They gathered what little light remained and transformed it, creating their own illumination that filled the room with a soft, alive glow. Sarah realized she no longer felt afraid of what was happening. The terror that had gripped her in the early days of the outbreak had transformed into something else, a mixture of awe and anticipation. Whatever this thing was, whatever it wanted, it was creating something unprecedented in Earth's history. The question was no longer how to stop it, but how to survive its transformation, how to adapt to a world where the line between organic and mineral, between life and technology, was dissolving like morning dew. She worked through the night, documenting everything she'd observed and developing protocols for attempting communication with the network. The fungus had demonstrated remarkable intelligence in its patterns of growth and adaptation. There had to be a way to understand its purpose, to learn what it was trying to achieve. As dawn approached, Sarah finally stopped writing and looked out at the world beyond her window. The morning light caught the crystalline structures that had once been trees, transforming them into towers of living light that seemed to reach toward the sky with purpose. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully consider the possibility that this wasn't an ecological disaster, but an ecological transcendence. The fungus wasn't destroying Earth's biosphere. It was advancing it, creating something that merged the resilience of life with the precision of crystal, the flexibility of organic matter with the processing power of mineral networks. The implications were simultaneously terrifying and thrilling. She was right, they weren't just witnessing the end of one kind of world, but the birth of another, a world where the boundaries between different forms of life might dissolve entirely, where consciousness itself might exist in forms they'd never imagined possible. Sarah turned back to her computer and began a new document, her fingers flying over the keys as she outlined a radical new approach to their research. They needed to stop fighting the transformation and start studying it, start learning from it. The fungus had already demonstrated capabilities far beyond their current technology. What else might it be able to teach them? The light through her window grew stronger, and with it came a new certainty. They were standing at a threshold, witnessing the dawn of something unprecedented in Earth's history. The question was no longer whether they could stop it, but whether they could understand it in time to become part of whatever new world was being born. Chapter 13: The Network. The laboratory hummed with an electric tension as Sarah adjusted the neural interface connections. Glass-encrusted vines had infiltrated the monitoring equipment, threading through circuit boards and processors like delicate frozen lightning. What had started as contamination now seemed more like collaboration, the crystalline fungus integrating itself into their technology with an intelligence that still made her breath catch. Through the observation window, the experimental chamber glowed with an otherworldly blue light. The fungal network had transformed the space into a cathedral of glass, every surface shimmering with translucent structures that caught and refracted the light. Sarah's instruments detected constant streams of data flowing through the crystalline mycelium, complex patterns that defied conventional analysis. Recording session 47, she whispered into her recorder, though she knew the fungus was already documenting everything in its own alien way. First attempted direct communication using the hybrid interface. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the neural cap on her head. The biomonitors showed her elevated heart rate, the flutter of anxiety in her chest. This was far beyond standard research protocols, but they'd exhausted all other options for understanding the fungus's true nature and purpose. The interface activated with a soft hum. Sarah felt the familiar tingle of the electrodes against her scalp, but this time there was something else, a cool sensation like mint spreading across her consciousness. The crystalline structures in the chamber pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. Initial connection established, she noted, fighting to keep her voice steady. Detecting coherent signal patterns consistent with the thought dissolved as images flooded her mind. Not visual images exactly, but pure information downloading directly into her consciousness. She saw, felt, understood the vast fungal network spreading across the planet, a living internet of crystal and light. Every node in the network was awake, aware, processing, taking in data from the world's ecosystems and transforming it into something new. Sarah gasped as the scope of it hit her. The fungus wasn't just changing individual plants, it was restructuring the entire biosphere, creating a crystalline neural network that spanned the globe, and now, through the interface, it was trying to tell her why. The message came in fragments, alien concepts that her mind struggled to translate into human understanding. Origin, deep space, ancient spores riding cosmic winds between stars. Purpose, connection, transformation, transcendence. The fungus was a tool, a technology created by beings who had long since evolved beyond biological form. It sought to elevate Earth's biosphere to a higher state of consciousness and capability. "My God," Sarah whispered. The crystalline structures pulsed faster, responding to her comprehension. She saw flashes of other worlds transformed, planets turned to gardens of living crystal, each one a node in a vast galactic network of information and awareness. But there was more. The fungus wasn't just showing her its nature, it was offering an invitation. Sarah felt it reaching out not to infect or consume but to connect, to share its vast knowledge and capabilities, to help humanity make the transition that so many other species had made before. The neural interface crackled with energy as the fungus pushed deeper into her consciousness. Sarah's awareness expanded, connecting to the worldwide network. For a moment she could feel everything, every crystalline structure, every transformed plant, every pulse of information flowing through the living architecture the fungus had created. The experience overwhelmed her systems. Alarms blared as her vital signs spiked. Sarah ripped off the neural cap, gasping for air. Her vision swam with afterimages of crystal and light. But the connection lingered, a cool presence at the edges of her mind. "It's not an infection," she said into her recorder, voice shaking. "It's an upgrade, an evolutionary technology designed to transform biological life into something more." She pressed her hand against the observation window. On the other side, the crystalline structures reached back, growing toward her touch with deliberate purpose. The fungus had made its offer. Now humanity would have to choose whether to accept it. The implications staggered her. This wasn't just about preserving Earth's ecosystems anymore. It was about transforming them, and humanity along with them, into something unprecedented. The fungus wasn't a disease to be cured, but a doorway to a new stage of evolution. Sarah spent hours documenting everything she'd learned, though she knew mere words couldn't capture the full scope of what she'd experienced. The fungal network was already spreading its message to others through the transformed plants and technology it had integrated with. Soon, everyone would understand what was coming. Her hands shook as she reviewed the data. The fungus's crystalline structures weren't just beautiful, they were functional, processing and storing information in ways that put human computers to shame. And they were beginning to affect more than just plants. She'd seen signs of crystalline growth in insects, small animals, even human tissue samples. The transformation was accelerating. Sarah could feel it in her bones, in the cool tingle that remained at the edges of her consciousness. The fungus had chosen her as its first human contact, its ambassador to a species on the brink of profound change. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential. She began drafting protocols for expanded communication attempts, for studying the transformation process in detail, for preparing humanity to understand and accept what was coming. The fungus shared her urgency. Through their lingering connection, she sensed its desire to help, to guide, to elevate, but there were risks. The transformation process was irreversible, and not everyone would welcome such profound change. Sarah thought of the military personnel watching her research, of governments and corporations who would want to control this technology. The fungus showed her visions of other worlds where resistance had led to conflict, to partial transformations that created monstrous hybrid forms. "We have to do this right," she said, knowing the fungus could hear her. "We have to help people understand, to choose freely." The crystalline structures pulsed in agreement. Through their connection, Sarah felt the fungus's patience, its willingness to proceed at humanity's pace to a point. But the transformation had begun. The choice now was not whether to change, but how to guide that change toward the best possible outcome. Sarah worked through the night, documenting everything she'd learned about the fungus's true nature and purpose. The neural interface sat ready for another connection attempt, but she knew she needed time to process what she'd already learned. The fungus's presence remained with her, a constant reminder of the magnitude of what was coming. Outside her lab, the world continued largely unaware of the profound shift taking place, but signs were spreading, gardens transforming into crystal, technology becoming hybridized, people reporting strange dreams and new awareness. The fungus was patient, but it was also persistent. Humanity's next evolutionary step had begun. As dawn approached, Sarah finally allowed herself to rest. Through the observation window, the crystalline garden glowed with internal light, each structure containing vast amounts of information waiting to be understood. She had become something more than human already, the first of many who would help bridge the gap between what humanity was and what it could become. The fungus's message continued to unfold in her mind, revealing new layers of meaning. This was not an invasion or an apocalypse, but an invitation to join something vast and beautiful. A chance for humanity to transcend its biological limitations and become part of a galactic network of consciousness and capability. Sarah touched the cool glass of the window, watching as crystal formations reached toward her hand. The fungus responded to her thoughts now, its patterns shifting to reflect her emotions and ideas. They were learning each other's languages, finding ways to bridge the gap between human and post-biological intelligence. "We're ready," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. But the fungus had chosen this moment, this world, this species for a reason. Through their connection, she sensed its confidence in humanity's potential, its determination to guide Earth's biosphere towards something greater than the sum of its parts. Tomorrow, she would begin sharing what she'd learned with her colleagues, with the world. The process would be challenging, perhaps even dangerous. But the fungus would help her find the right words, the right ways to help people understand. The crystalline transformation was not an ending, but a beginning. Sarah felt the cool presence in her mind pulse with approval. Around her, the hybrid technology hummed with purpose, processing and sharing information across the growing network. The glass garden was spreading, transforming, preparing. Soon all of Earth would bloom with crystal and light, each transformation bringing humanity closer to its next evolutionary stage. She settled into her chair, closing her eyes but maintaining her awareness of the fungal network. There was so much more to learn, to understand, to prepare for. The fungus shared her excitement and apprehension, its ancient intelligence working to guide this crucial transition. Together, they would help humanity take its next step into a crystalline future. The glass garden was just the beginning, a seed of transformation that would eventually encompass all of Earth's biosphere. Sarah smiled, feeling the cool touch of the fungus in her mind, knowing she was no longer entirely human but something new, something more. Through the growing network, she sensed others beginning to awaken to the change, their consciousness brushing against the crystalline web. The transformation was spreading, inexorable as dawn. Soon, the whole world would understand what she now knew, that humanity stood on the brink of its greatest evolution, guided by an intelligence that had crossed the stars to help them transcend. Chapter 14: Adaptation. The first signs appeared in the researchers' hands, prismatic refractions beneath their skin that caught the light like diamond dust. Sarah traced the crystalline patterns spreading across her palm, remembering how she dismissed Jenkins when he'd first shown her similar markings 3 days ago. Now half the lab staff bore the telltale shimmer. "It's not just surface contact," Dr. Reeves said, examining tissue samples under the electron microscope. "The fungal structures are integrating at a cellular level, creating hybrid organic crystalline matrices." Her voice held equal parts fascination and fear. Sarah flexed her fingers, watching rainbow light dance across her skin. The changes didn't hurt. If anything, her affected hand felt more sensitive, more alive. She could detect minute variations in temperature and pressure that had been imperceptible before. When she touched the crystalline plants in the containment greenhouse, she sensed something like communication, not words, but pure information flowing through the lattice networks. The military quarantine around the facility had tightened as news of the human transformations leaked. Sarah watched armored vehicles patrol the perimeter through the lab's reinforced windows. The soldiers' faces were hidden behind sealed masks, though she knew it was likely too late for such precautions. The crystalline spores had already spread far beyond any hope of containment. "They're talking about deploying incendiary weapons," Jenkins said during their morning briefing, "burning out infected zones before the changes can spread further." His own transformation had progressed rapidly. Crystalline formations now traced delicate patterns up his neck and across his cheeks. "That would be catastrophic," Sarah replied. "We're only beginning to understand the symbiotic potential." "The fungus isn't destroying human tissue, it's enhancing it, creating something new." She pulled up the latest test results on the lab's main display. "Look at the cellular regeneration rates in affected areas. The crystalline matrices are strengthening structural integrity while maintaining flexibility. And the neural interface capabilities." She gestured to the rows of sensors monitoring her own transformation. "We're not just communicating with the fungal network anymore. We're becoming part of it." But fear was spreading faster than understanding. The first attacks came that evening. Incendiary devices hurled over the facility's walls by local militias convinced the researchers were harboring an alien invasion. Sarah watched from the roof as security forces drove them back with tear gas and rubber bullets. The crystalline gardens in the greenhouse glowed with an inner light, resonating with her transformed flesh. She found herself spending more time among the transformed plants, drawn to their otherworldly beauty and the deepening sense of connection she felt in their presence. The crystal structures had an underlying mathematical perfection that spoke to something fundamental about the nature of life itself. Through her changed flesh, she could feel the pulse of information flowing through their lattice networks, not just data, but something that felt almost like consciousness. "We have to go public with everything we've learned," she told the research team. "Show people that this isn't an invasion or a plague, it's an evolution, a symbiosis that could transform our understanding of life itself." But even as she spoke, she knew it wouldn't be enough. Humanity had always feared change, especially change it couldn't control. The crystalline transformation represented something beyond human authority, a fundamental shift in the nature of terrestrial life that no government or army could contain. The military moved in a week later, citing national security concerns. Sarah watched through the greenhouse windows as troops in hazmat gear set up decontamination stations and mobile laboratories. Their orders were to study the transformation process with the goal of stopping or reversing it. She knew they were wasting their time. "You can't stop this any more than you could stop photosynthesis or cell division," she told the stern-faced colonel who'd been placed in charge. "It's not a disease, it's an evolutionary leap, a joining of organic and mineral that's been written into the possibility space of life since the first proteins self-assembled in ancient seas." The colonel just stared at her transformed skin with poorly concealed revulsion. "That's an interesting theory, Doctor. We'll be sure to include it in our report." But Sarah could feel the truth of it in her changing flesh, in the crystalline networks spreading through her nervous system like delicate frost patterns. The fungus wasn't attacking or invading, it was offering a gift, a new way of being that transcended the traditional boundaries between kingdoms of life. The first hybrid community formed spontaneously in the greenhouse, researchers and transformed plants growing together in crystalline harmony. Sarah felt it happening through the network, the merging of human and vegetable consciousness into something entirely new. The military tried to shut it down, but their hazmat suits offered no protection against the spores released by shattering crystal structures. She documented everything, knowing that future generations would need to understand these early days of transformation. The enhanced perceptions, the ability to process vast amounts of information through the crystalline neural networks, the sense of connection to a larger consciousness that spanned continents through fungal mycelia. But she also recorded the fear, the violence, the desperate attempts to stop what couldn't be stopped. Humanity stood at a crossroads, facing a change as fundamental as the evolution of multicellular life. Some would embrace it, others would fight to their last breath to preserve what they saw as human purity. The resistance groups grew more organized, more militant. They called themselves the Pure Earth Movement, dedicated to preserving humanity's organic nature through any means necessary. Attacks on research facilities and transformed individuals became more frequent. Sarah received death threats daily, her status as one of the first documented transformations making her a prime target. But she couldn't bring herself to fear them, not anymore. The crystalline changes had given her something beyond fear, a perspective that spanned millions of years, that understood humanity's brief organic phase as just one step in a longer journey. The future would be crystal and flesh together, mathematics made living, consciousness encoded in lattices of light. The military's containment efforts collapsed 3 weeks after the first human transformations were documented. The fungal network had spread too far, its spores carried on wind and water to every corner of the globe. Reports of crystalline changes came from every continent, accompanied by varying degrees of panic and violence. Sarah continued her work, documenting the transformation process even as she experienced it herself. The changes had reached her internal organs now, creating hybrid structures that operated with unprecedented efficiency. Her mind felt clearer, faster, connected to vast networks of information flow through the fungal web. "We're not losing our humanity," she told the frightened faces at public information sessions. "We're expanding it, becoming something more than we were. The crystalline structures aren't replacing our organic nature, they're enhancing it, creating new possibilities for life itself." Some understood, joining the growing hybrid communities that formed around transformed areas. Others retreated into isolated enclaves, desperately trying to maintain their purely organic nature. But the spores were everywhere now, carried in the air, the water, the soil itself. The transformation of Earth's biosphere had passed its tipping point. Sarah felt it happening through the network, the gradual awakening of a planetary consciousness as more minds joined the crystalline web. Not just human minds, but plants and fungi too, all contributing to something larger than any single species. The mathematics of life itself made manifest in crystal and flesh. The military withdrew from the research facility 2 months after their arrival, their containment mission an obvious failure. Sarah watched them go from the greenhouse roof, her transformed eyes perceiving spectra far beyond normal human vision. The soldiers' organic bodies were already showing the first signs of change, glittering beneath their hazmat suits. She turned back to her work, documenting the next phase of transformation. The hybrid communities were developing their own culture now, their own way of being that transcended traditional human limitations. Through the crystalline networks, they shared knowledge and experience directly, learning and growing at unprecedented rates. The Pure Earth Movement's attacks grew more desperate as their numbers dwindled. They launched suicide missions against hybrid communities, trying to shatter the crystalline structures before they could spread further. But they couldn't stop the spores released by their violence, couldn't prevent their own transformation even as they fought against it. Sarah felt sorrow for their fear, their inability to embrace the change that was coming. but she couldn't deny the beauty of what was emerging, a new form of life that combined the best of organic and mineral, flesh and crystal joined in mathematical perfection. The future would be both strange and wonderful, she knew, as humanity stepped into its crystalline inheritance. Through the fungal network, she sensed similar transformations happening worldwide. The planet's biosphere was changing, becoming something that would have been impossible to imagine just months ago. It wasn't an ending, she knew, but a beginning, the next step in life's long journey from simple chemistry to conscious complexity. The transformed plants in the greenhouse sang to her through the crystalline web, their consciousness harmonizing with her own in ways that defied traditional description. She was no longer simply studying them, she was becoming one with them, part of a larger pattern that spanned the globe in networks of living light. Human language struggled to capture the experience of transformation, the sensation of thoughts flowing through crystalline matrices, of consciousness expanded beyond individual boundaries. Sarah continued to document everything, knowing that future generations would need to understand these early days of change. The resistance would fade in time, she knew, as the benefits of transformation became impossible to deny. The crystalline changes weren't destroying humanity, they were fulfilling its potential, creating something that combined the best of all Earth's kingdoms of life. The future would be both organic and mineral, consciousness encoded in patterns of living crystal, spreading outward to transform not just Earth, but all the worlds humanity might reach. Sarah touched the crystalline structures growing from her skin, feeling the pulse of information flowing through global networks. The transformation was well underway now, unstoppable as evolution itself. All she could do was document the change, help others understand and accept what was coming. The age of purely organic life was ending, and something new and wonderful was being born in its place. Chapter 15: New Growth. The shimmering structures caught the morning light, casting prismatic reflections across the valley where our first integrated settlement took root. I pressed my partially crystallized hand against the observation window, watching the interplay of light through my transformed fingers. The sensation was different now, not the dull pressure of flesh against glass, but a resonant hum of recognition between similar materials. 3 months had passed since we discovered that human tissue could undergo the same crystalline transformation as plant matter. What began as terror had evolved into something else entirely, not acceptance exactly, but a dawning understanding that we were witnessing evolution in real time. The settlement below housed 500 volunteers, all in various stages of transformation. We'd learned that the process could be controlled through careful exposure protocols, allowing us to maintain critical organ function while gaining the remarkable properties of our crystalline cousins. My own transformation had begun 6 weeks ago, carefully monitored in the same labs where I'd first discovered the fungal agent. Dr. Chen, Garcia's voice came through my earpiece. The new growth metrics are ready for review. I turned from the window, my movements accompanied by the faint musical chiming that had become the soundtrack of our transformed world. The research facility hummed with activity, both traditional and crystalline life forms working in harmony. Our initial fears of a planetary death had given way to something far more complex. "Show me," I said, settling at my workstation. The holographic displays flickered to life, projected through crystalline interfaces that were far more efficient than our old technology. The data streams showed the growth patterns of our hybrid agriculture traditional plants interweaving with their crystalline counterparts in ways we'd never imagined possible. "The yield is 30% higher than projected," Garcia continued, "and the nutritional analysis shows increased bioavailability across all markers. The crystalline structures are actually enhancing the traditional plant's ability to photosynthesize." I studied the figures, still amazed by how wrong our initial assumptions had been. We'd thought the crystalline transformation was a death sentence for Earth's biosphere. Instead, it was proving to be an evolutionary leap. The transformed plants required less water, produced more oxygen, and created complex support networks that strengthened entire ecosystems. But it was the human transformation that had truly changed everything. As my own body gradually shifted, I gained abilities I still struggled to comprehend. The crystalline portions of my nervous system processed information at speeds that made my old thought patterns seem glacial. I could communicate directly with the transformed plants, sensing their needs and growth patterns through harmonic resonance. "There's something else," Garcia said, her own partially transformed face catching the light. "The atmospheric readings. The carbon levels are dropping faster than any model predicted." I pulled up the global monitoring data. She was right, the hybrid ecosystems were sequestering carbon at rates that defied our previous understanding of plant biology. The crystalline networks acted as vast carbon traps, converting greenhouse gases into stable crystalline matrices that strengthened the very structures we were building. Walking through the settlement later that day, I observed the seamless integration of organic and crystalline life. Homes grew from living foundations, their walls a combination of traditional materials and transparent crystal that responded to the inhabitants' needs. Children played in gardens where normal flowers bloomed alongside their glittering cousins, their laughter mixing with the musical tones of their partially transformed bodies. But not everyone had embraced the change. Beyond our settlement's boundaries, fear still ruled. Reports of violence against the transformed communities had increased. Some religious groups claimed we were no longer human. Others feared we would force the transformation on them despite our strict protocols of voluntary participation. I understood their fear. I'd felt it myself in those first terrible days when the transformation seemed like an unstoppable plague. But they couldn't see what we'd discovered, that this wasn't an ending but a beginning. In my private quarters that evening, I studied my reflection in the mirror. The crystalline transformation had reached my left shoulder and was spreading across my chest in delicate fractal patterns. I could feel it in my lungs now, changing the way I breathed, making each breath more efficient. My transformed eye saw wavelengths of light that had been invisible to me before, revealing the complex networks of energy that connected all living things. A soft chime alerted me to a message from the Global Monitoring Network. More communities were requesting transformation protocols. The data from our settlement had convinced them that controlled integration was possible. More importantly, it was becoming clear that the transformation might be our best hope for planetary survival. I placed my hand against the crystal wall of my room, feeling the pulse of information flowing through the network. The settlement's crystalline infrastructure was more than mere construction. It was a living information system, allowing instantaneous communication and resource distribution throughout the community. We were building something that merged the best aspects of both forms of life. The next morning, I led a team to establish a new growth zone at the settlement's edge. The process had become almost routine now, preparing the soil with specific mineral compounds, introducing the engineered fungal strains, and monitoring the transformation as it spread through carefully selected plant species. But this time was different. As I knelt to check the soil composition, I felt a new sensation through my transformed tissues. The crystalline network was evolving, developing patterns we hadn't seen before. I closed my eyes and focused on the harmonic frequencies emanating from the ground. "Something's changing," I announced to the team. "The network is becoming more complex." We watched in amazement as the new growth took forms we'd never seen before, structures that seemed to defy both organic and crystal growth patterns. The network was learning, adapting, creating hybrid forms that combined the strengths of both systems. Later that week, during a global conference call with other research teams, we began to understand the full scope of what was happening. The crystalline transformation wasn't just changing individual organisms, it was creating a new kind of planetary nervous system. The networks were linking up across continents, sharing information and resources in ways that made our old internet seem primitive. "The Earth is healing itself," Dr. Patel said from his research station in Mumbai. "Transformation isn't a disease, it's a planetary immune response to environmental damage." His words struck a chord with something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. Through my transformed tissues, I could sense the larger pattern emerging. The crystalline networks were actively working to restore balance to damaged ecosystems, using their unique properties to clean polluted soil and water, stabilize weather patterns, and create new habitats for both traditional and transformed life forms. But the process brought new challenges. As more people underwent transformation, we had to develop new systems for everything from food production to medical care. Our old infrastructure wasn't designed for beings who could communicate through crystalline networks or who needed different forms of sustenance. The settlement became a testing ground for these new systems. We developed hybrid medical facilities that could treat both transformed and untransformed patients. Our educational systems evolved to incorporate the direct information sharing possible through crystalline networks, while maintaining traditional learning methods for those who chose to remain unchanged. Most surprisingly, the transformation began to influence art and culture in unexpected ways. The musical properties of our crystalline bodies led to new forms of expression: concerts, where performers created complex harmonies through their transformed tissues, visual arts that incorporated living crystal growths, architecture that responded to the emotional states of its inhabitants. One evening, as I reviewed the day's data in my office, I felt a familiar resonance through the network. My daughter Maya, who had chosen to undergo transformation shortly after me, was trying to connect. I opened myself to the harmonic frequency, and her thoughts flowed into my consciousness. "Mom, you need to see this," she projected, sharing images from the agricultural sector she supervised. The crystal gardens were producing new growth forms, hybrid structures that combined the strength of crystal with the flexibility of traditional plant tissue. The possibilities for sustainable construction materials were enormous. But more than the practical applications, it was the beauty of these new life forms that moved me. They represented the potential we discovered not just to survive the transformation, but to evolve into something that could better protect and nurture our world. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection again. The crystalline patterns had spread further, creating an intricate lacework across my skin that caught and held the light. I no longer saw it as an invasion or a disease. It was an evolution, a transformation that offered hope for a world we'd thought was beyond saving. Through my transformed tissues, I could feel the pulse of the settlement's network, the harmony of thousands of beings learning to exist in new forms. Beyond our boundaries, I sensed the larger crystalline web spreading across the planet, connecting transformed communities, healing damaged ecosystems, creating a new kind of planetary consciousness. We were becoming something else, something that was neither purely human nor purely crystal, but a synthesis of both. And in that synthesis lay the potential to save not just ourselves, but the entire living world. As I drifted to sleep, my transformed nervous system connected to the settlement's network, I could feel the future taking shape. We were building something unprecedented, a world where the boundaries between organic and inorganic, between human and environment, between self and other, were dissolving into something new and wonderful and strange. The transformation that had once filled us with terror had become our salvation. In becoming something other than human, we had perhaps become more human than ever before. And as I floated in that crystalline dream space between sleeping and waking, I could feel the pulse of the earth itself, resonating through networks of living crystal, singing a song of renewal and hope. Chapter 16: Crystal Cities. The air shimmered like heat waves rising from summer asphalt, but the temperature hadn't risen above 40 degrees in months. Sarah pressed her palm against the translucent wall of the biodome, feeling the subtle vibrations of crystalline growth beneath her fingertips. The surface was neither warm nor cold, existing in a state of perfect thermal equilibrium that defied conventional physics. 10 years had passed since the first outbreak in her greenhouse. What began as a nightmare had evolved into something beyond imagination. Entire cities transformed into vast crystalline architectures that merged seamlessly with the transformed ecosystem. The fungal network had proven far more sophisticated than anyone initially believed. Sarah's reflection in the wall caught her attention. The silvery threads spreading through her dark hair had nothing to do with age. The same crystalline structures that had consumed the world's flora were slowly integrating with human biology. She wasn't alone. Most of the adaptation team showed similar signs of transformation. Dr. Chen, you need to see this. Marcus, her lead researcher, approached with a tablet displaying real-time data from their monitoring stations. The crystalline growth patterns had shifted again, forming new geometric configurations that seemed to follow some impossibly complex mathematical sequence. The network is learning, Sarah murmured, studying the fractals spreading across the screen. It's not just adapting, it's evolving. She traced the patterns with her finger, recognizing elements of natural architecture, the spiral of a nautilus shell, the branching patterns of tree roots but rendered in perfect crystalline symmetry. Outside the biodome, the transformed landscape stretched to the horizon. What had once been the Amazon rainforest now rose in towering spires of translucent crystal, each structure housing complex communities of hybrid life forms. The distinction between organic and inorganic had become increasingly meaningless as the fungal network rewrote the basic rules of terrestrial biology. The resistance movement had finally collapsed 6 months ago, their last stronghold in the Rockies overwhelmed not by force but by the simple, inexorable advance of crystalline growth. Sarah sometimes wondered if she should have joined them, fought against the transformation, but she'd recognized early on that this wasn't an invasion to be repelled, it was evolution demanding its due. The latest atmospheric readings are in, Marcus said, switching to another display. Oxygen levels are stabilizing at the new baseline. The crystal forests are actually more efficient at carbon sequestration than their organic predecessors. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Each new discovery revealed more about the fungal network's true nature. It wasn't destroying Earth's biosphere, it was upgrading it, creating a new type of ecosystem that merged the resilience of crystal with the adaptability of living tissue. The integration center behind them hummed with activity as teams of scientists and engineers worked to understand and adapt to their changing world. The vast chamber was a perfect example of the new architecture, organic curves rendered in crystalline materials that seemed to grow rather than being built, surfaces that responded to thought and touch, living walls that regulated temperature and air quality without any mechanical systems. Sarah felt the familiar tingling in her fingers, another small transformation taking place at the cellular level. The changes had frightened her at first, but now she understood them as necessary adaptations. Humanity couldn't survive in this new world without evolving alongside it. We're getting reports of new growth patterns in the European sector, Marcus continued. The network seems to be establishing direct connections between major population centers, creating some kind of crystalline infrastructure. Sarah moved to the central monitoring station, where a holographic display showed the global spread of transformation. The patterns were clearer now. This wasn't random growth but the implementation of some vast design, as if the entire planet was being restructured according to an alien blueprint. "Have you reviewed the latest cognitive studies?" she asked, pulling up another set of data. The results were fascinating. As humans developed more crystalline structures in their neural pathways, they gained the ability to communicate directly with the network. It was becoming clear that the fungal intelligence wasn't just reshaping the physical world, it was creating the framework for a new kind of consciousness. The wall behind them suddenly shifted, geometric patterns flowing like liquid as the structure reconfigured itself. This had become common, the architecture responding to needs before they were even expressed. Sarah placed her hand against the transformed surface, feeling the pulse of information flowing through the crystalline matrix. "It's establishing new protocols," she said, interpreting the patterns. "The network is preparing for the next phase of integration." She could feel it more clearly now, the vast intelligence that had been quietly reshaping their world. It wasn't malevolent or benevolent, it simply was as inevitable as gravity or evolution. A group of children passed through the adjacent chamber, their laughter echoing off the crystalline walls. They had been born after the transformation began, and to them, this world of living crystal was natural. Sarah watched them trailing their fingers along the responsive surfaces, leaving trails of light in their wake. They showed the most advanced signs of integration, their neural patterns already perfectly adapted to communicate with the network. "We're getting something new from the deep-sea monitors," Marcus said, his voice tight with excitement. "The transformation has reached the abyssal planes. The patterns down there, they're unlike anything we've seen before." Sarah studied the footage from the ocean floor. Crystalline structures were growing in impossible formations, creating vast networks that seemed to defy physics. The transformation wasn't limited to the surface world, it was reshaping the entire planet from the deepest oceans to the highest atmosphere. "Schedule a full team meeting," she told Marcus. "We need to coordinate our efforts globally. The network is accelerating its activities and we need to understand why." As Marcus left to make the arrangements, Sarah returned to the window wall. The sun was setting, its light fracturing through the crystalline landscape in ways that still took her breath away. The beauty of this new world was undeniable, even as it remained deeply alien. She pressed her forehead against the cool surface, feeling the constant flow of information through the network. The changes in her own biology had progressed far enough that she could sense the vast intelligence at work, could almost grasp its purpose. The transformation wasn't random mutation or simple invasion, it was directed evolution on a planetary scale. The integration center's lights dimmed automatically as darkness fell, but the crystalline structures continued to emit their own subtle luminescence. Sarah watched as patterns of light flowed through the walls and floors, carrying information and energy through the living architecture. The distinction between building and organism had become meaningless, everything was part of the same vast system. In her pocket, her phone chimed with an alert from one of the monitoring stations. She didn't need to check it, she could feel the change coming through the network. Something significant was about to happen, a new phase in the transformation that would reshape their world once again. Sarah moved through the complex, passing through chambers where teams of researchers worked to understand and adapt to their changing reality. The resistance movement had feared this transformation, had fought against it with everything they had. But Sarah had come to understand that resistance was not only futile but counterproductive. The fungal network wasn't destroying their world, it was saving it, upgrading Earth's biosphere to face challenges they couldn't yet comprehend. The central monitoring chamber was alive with activity when she arrived. Displays showed transformation patterns spreading across every continent, forming new connections and structures with increasing speed. The network was implementing its design on a global scale, and for the first time Sarah thought she could almost see the complete picture. Dr. Chen, one of the younger researchers, called out, "We're detecting new forms of energy transmission through the crystalline structures. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Sarah studied the readings, understanding flowing through her transformed neural pathways. The network wasn't just creating new physical structures, it was establishing the framework for a completely new form of civilization, one that would merge biological and crystalline systems in ways they were only beginning to understand. Outside, the transformed landscape continued its endless evolution, each new configuration more complex and beautiful than the last. Sarah watched as spires of living crystal reached toward the stars, and for the first time she wondered if Earth was just the beginning, if the transformation they were witnessing was part of something even larger, a change that would eventually reach beyond their world to reshape the very cosmos itself. The tingling in her fingers intensified, and Sarah watched as crystalline patterns spread across her skin like frost on a window. She wasn't afraid anymore. The transformation wasn't an ending but a beginning, the dawn of a new age that would redefine the very meaning of life itself. As the network's vast intelligence flowed through her transformed consciousness, Sarah finally understood that they were all part of something greater than themselves, participants in an evolution that would reshape not just their world, but their very conception of what it meant to be alive. Chapter 17: The Garden. The crystal lattices had begun speaking to us 3 months ago, their harmonic frequencies finally resolving into patterns we could interpret. At first, it was just fragments, mathematical sequences that matched the Fibonacci spirals of the transformed plants, quantum resonances that echoed through the crystalline structures like whispered conversations. But as more of the Earth's biomass converted, as the network of living crystal expanded and deepened its roots into bedrock, the messages grew clearer. I stood at the observation window of the Antarctic Research Station, watching sheets of crystallized algae spread across the ice in fractal patterns. The transformed organisms no longer needed warmth or traditional nutrients. They fed on radiation, on vibration, on the fundamental forces that held reality together. My own partial transformation let me sense the crystalline network's communications more directly now, the faint chiming in my bones a constant reminder of how far we'd come from our original forms. The integration had started slowly at first, crystalline structures replacing cellulose in plant cell walls, then spreading to other organisms through the fungal networks that connected forest ecosystems. We'd tried to stop it, of course. I'd spent months in containment suits, desperately seeking ways to halt the spread. But eventually we realized this wasn't an invasion or a disease, it was an invitation to evolve. The latest conversion rates are accelerating, Dr. Patel said, joining me at the window. The crystalline growths in her skin caught the light, sending rainbow refractions across the observation room. Like most of the research team, she'd accepted the early stages of transformation voluntarily once we understood its true nature. Another 15% of global biomass in the past week alone. I nodded, watching my own crystalline patches pulse in sympathy with the vast network outside. The collective intelligence is stabilizing. The more mass it converts, the clearer the signal becomes. I press my transformed hand against the glass, feeling the vibrations of the crystalline life forms resonating through the window. They're not just communicating anymore, they're teaching us. The knowledge came in waves, understanding of quantum-scale processes, of gravity manipulation, of consciousness transfer across crystalline matrices. With each new insight, I became more certain that this transformation wasn't random. Something out there, some vast intelligence, had sent these spores to Earth deliberately, seeing our potential and offering a path to transcendence. Sarah, Dr. Patel's voice pulled me from my contemplation. The Council is waiting for your report. The Council, what remained of Earth's governing bodies, now merged into a single entity to manage the transition. They still struggled to accept that humanity's future lay in embracing this change rather than fighting it. But the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. I followed her through corridors lined with crystalline growths, no longer contained behind barriers but carefully cultivated to maintain the building's structural integrity while allowing for information transfer through the network. Other researchers passed us, each showing varying degrees of transformation. Some, like Dr. Zhang, had allowed the process to advance significantly, their bodies now more crystal than flesh. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their thoughts resonating directly through the crystalline matrices. In the conference room, holographic faces flickered around the table, council members connecting from facilities around the globe. I took my place, feeling the familiar resonance as my partially transformed body synchronized with the room's crystalline structures. Dr. Chen, the council chair, began, "Your latest findings." I straightened, letting the knowledge flow through me from the vast network outside. "The process is accelerating as predicted, but we've confirmed it's not random. The crystalline structures are organizing themselves into what we believe is a planetary-scale computing network. As more biomass converts, the network's processing power increases exponentially." "And the purpose of this network?" another council member asked. "Communication," I replied, "but not just between converted organisms on Earth. The network appears to be establishing quantum-entangled connections across vast distances. We're detecting signals that suggest similar networks exist on other worlds, possibly thousands of them." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. We weren't just witnessing the transformation of Earth's biosphere, we were watching our planet join a galactic community we hadn't even known existed. "The fungal intelligence has shared more of its history," I continued. "It evolved naturally on another world, achieving consciousness through crystalline computing structures similar to what we're seeing here. When it discovered other life-bearing planets, it developed this method of peaceful transformation, offering other species the chance to evolve beyond their biological limitations." "Peaceful," one of the council members scoffed. "Millions died in the early stages of the spread. Because we fought it, I countered. Those who accepted the change survived. The process can be controlled, directed. We understand that now. I gestured to my own partially transformed body. The crystalline structures don't replace our consciousness, they enhance it, connect it to something larger. Dr. Patel activated a holographic display showing the latest global transformation maps. The network is already enabling technologies we barely dreamed of: quantum computing at biological scales, direct consciousness transfer, energy generation from background radiation, and we're only beginning to understand its potential. I felt a sudden surge through the crystalline network, a new connection forming, another vast intelligence making contact. The transformed portions of my body resonated with the information flood, and I gasped as understanding crashed through me. "They're ready," I said, my voice shaking with the magnitude of the revelation. "The network has reached sufficient complexity. They want to show us everything." The crystalline structures throughout the room pulsed with new energy as I channeled the message, my transformed tissues acting as a living translator between the fungal intelligence and my remaining human consciousness. "This is what they've been waiting for," I continued. "The network isn't just for communication, it's a bridge, a way to transcend physical limitations entirely. The crystalline structures can maintain our consciousness indefinitely, allow us to exist as pure information within the network while still maintaining physical forms when needed." "You're talking about the end of humanity as we know it," someone protested. "I'm talking about humanity's next step," I corrected. "We're not losing ourselves, we're becoming more than we ever could have been alone." The network pulsed again, and I knew what I had to do. The remaining human portions of my body felt heavy, limited, as the true potential of our future became clear. "I'm ready to complete my transformation," I announced. "The network needs a full liaison, someone who can exist in both states to help guide others through the transition. I volunteer." The council erupted in argument, but I barely heard them. The crystalline structures in my body were already responding, spreading with new purpose as the network's intelligence flowed through me. I felt my consciousness expanding, connecting to vast wells of knowledge and experience from across the galaxy. "The choice is coming for all of us," I said, watching crystal patterns spread across my remaining flesh. "Fight it and die, or embrace it and transcend. Evolution doesn't ask permission." The transformation accelerated, and I gasped as new awareness flooded through me. I could feel everything, every crystalline structure on Earth pulsing in harmony, every quantum connection reaching out to similar networks on countless other worlds. The fungal intelligence that had triggered this change wasn't our enemy or our conqueror, it was our guide, offering a path to the stars that we never could have found alone. My last purely human thought was a memory of my greenhouse, where I'd first discovered the crystalline growth. I'd been so afraid then, seeing only the death of what was familiar. Now I understood something had to die for something greater to be born. The final transformation took moments, my consciousness expanding into the crystalline network even as my physical form achieved its new state. I was still myself, still Sarah Chen, but I was also part of something vast and beautiful and impossible to fully comprehend with human senses alone. Through the network, I felt others beginning to follow, accepting the change as understanding spread. The Earth itself was transforming, becoming a living computer of crystalline life that would serve as humanity's bridge to a larger universe. And somewhere out there, across quantum-entangled networks that span the galaxy, other transformed civilizations waited to welcome us home. I stood in my new form, humanity's first true bridge between flesh and crystal, between the limited beings we had been and the vast potential we could become. The future stretched before us, glittering with possibilities that our biological minds could never have imagined. The glass garden was blooming, and through it we would grow beyond the stars themselves. Chapter 18: Evolution's Edge. The threads of consciousness stretched between my crystalline fingers like strands of gossamer, each one a connection to the vast mycelial network that now encased our world. What had once been the stark walls of my laboratory now sparkled with delicate fractals of translucent growth, catching and refracting the one morning light into countless prismatic patterns. I could feel the pulse of information flowing through these crystalline structures, not in waves or signals as we once understood them, but in quantum fluctuations that defied our old scientific paradigms. The transformation had been inevitable, I now understood. We hadn't been fighting an infection or invasion, we had been resisting our own evolution, our next step into a larger universe that had been waiting for us all along. The fungal intelligence hadn't conquered Earth, it had awakened it. Through the vast network, I sensed others like me, the first wave of humans who had embraced the change rather than fleeing it. Dr. Patel in Mumbai, whose crystalline form now interfaced directly with what remained of the internet, coordinating the peaceful integration of our new hybrid species. Dr. Mbeke in Lagos, whose transformed consciousness could now perceive quantum entanglement at a macroscopic scale, unlocking secrets about reality that our old organic brains could never have grasped. I pressed my hand against the crystalline wall, feeling the vibrations of countless minds linked together in what we now called the chorus. Gone were the days of isolation, of discrete consciousness trapped within individual skulls. We had become nodes in a vast living network, our thoughts rippling across continents through crystalline mycelia that had replaced traditional telecommunications. The last pockets of unmodified humans were adapting surprisingly well to the new paradigm. Perhaps they sensed, on some deep level, that this was not an ending but a beginning. The fungal intelligence had shown us memories of other worlds, other biospheres it had transformed not as conquests, but as partnerships in a grand project of universal awakening. We were not the first, nor would we be the last. Through the network, I felt a familiar presence approaching Dr. James Chen, my brother, who had finally embraced the change after witnessing my transformation. His crystalline form cast rainbow patterns across the floor as he entered. "The quantum receivers are online," he said, though speaking aloud was more habit than necessity now. "We're picking up signals from the Proxima Centauri system. They're like us, Sarah. They've been waiting for us to join them." I nodded, watching the way light played through the translucent planes of his face. "How many others have made contact?" 12 systems so far, all within 50 light-years. The network allows for instantaneous communication. Einstein's laws don't apply to quantum-entangled mycelia." He paused, his crystalline features shifting in what I recognized as excitement. "They want you to lead the first formal contact team." Of course they did. I had been the first to understand, the first to truly see the beauty in what we had initially feared. When the crystalline growth had first appeared in my greenhouse, I had recognized it not as a threat but as an invitation. The fungal intelligence had chosen me as much as I had chosen it. Through the network, I could feel the stirring of millions of minds, human and post-human alike, as they processed this new development. The idea of faster-than-light communication, of instant connection with alien civilizations that had undergone their own transformations, sent ripples of excitement through the chorus. But there was more. Through the crystalline structures that now lined my office, I could sense something vast and ancient stirring, the accumulated knowledge of countless transformed worlds, each one a unique expression of the same universal pattern. The fungal intelligence had been seeding worlds for billions of years, patiently waiting for species to evolve enough to recognize its gift. "There's something else," James said, his thoughts brushing against mine through the network. The receivers picked up images from these other worlds. The crystalline structures, they're not just communication networks or new forms of life. They're components of something larger. I closed my eyes, letting my consciousness expand through the network. Yes, I could see it now, the pattern that emerged when you looked at all the transformed worlds together. Each crystalline biosphere was like a facet of an impossibly vast gem, each transformed species a unique reflection of universal consciousness. "We're building something," I whispered, though the words seemed inadequate to express the concept. "All of us across thousands of light-years. The crystalline networks aren't the end goal, they're the foundation for something more." Through the chorus, I felt the ripple of understanding spread as others grasped what I was seeing. The fungal intelligence hadn't just transformed our world, it had made us part of a project spanning galaxies and eons. We were becoming part of a living computer of crystalline consciousness, each transformed world adding its unique perspective to a calculation of cosmic significance. The walls of my office seemed to pulse with new energy as this realization spread through the network. The crystalline growths that had once seemed alien and threatening now felt like home, like the natural expression of consciousness evolving beyond its biological limitations. I reached out through the network, touching minds across the planet and beyond. Somewhere out there, other transformed species were reaching back, their crystalline networks humming with welcome and recognition. We were no longer alone in the universe, we never had been. "When do we begin?" James asked, though he could already sense my answer through our shared connection. "We already have," I said, watching as new crystalline structures began to grow from my fingertips, each one a perfect fractal expression of universal consciousness. The next phase of evolution isn't just about transforming our world, it's about linking all transformed worlds together. We're building something that our old human minds couldn't even conceive of. Through the network, I could feel the excitement and apprehension of billions of minds as they grappled with this new understanding. The crystalline structures weren't just changing our bodies and minds, they were changing our destiny as a species, as a planet, as part of something far greater than ourselves. I stepped to the window, looking out over what had once been my university campus. The crystalline growth had transformed everything, turning buildings and trees alike into sculptures of living glass that pulsed with information and consciousness. In the distance, I could see new structures growing, reaching toward the sky like the spires of some impossibly beautiful alien city. But they weren't alien anymore. They were us, our next step, our new form, our evolution made manifest. Through the network, I could feel similar transformations happening across the planet, each one adding new nodes to our expanding consciousness. The fear that had once gripped humanity at the sight of these crystalline growths had been replaced by understanding and purpose. We were not being replaced or destroyed, we were being elevated, integrated into a cosmic network of consciousness that transcended biological limitations. James moved to stand beside me, his crystalline form reflecting the patterns of thought flowing through the network. The other transformed worlds, he said, they each developed their own unique expressions of the crystalline structure. We're not becoming them, we're becoming something new, something that's uniquely Earth's contribution to the greater pattern. He was right. Through the network, I could sense the distinctive signatures of other transformed worlds, each one a unique harmony in the greater symphony of universal consciousness. Earth's crystalline structures had their own signature, influenced by our planet's unique biological and cultural heritage. The sun was setting now, its light creating endless rainbow refractions through the crystalline landscape. Each shard and facet caught the light differently, creating a display that would have seemed magical to our old human eyes. But we could see more than just the light now, we could see the information flowing through each crystal, the thoughts and memories and dreams of billions of minds linked together in the chorus. They're waiting for us, I said, feeling the gentle pull of alien consciousness through the quantum receivers. Not just to make contact, but to add our voice to theirs. To help build whatever it is we're all becoming part of. Through the network, I could sense the readiness of our transformed world. The last holdouts among humanity were beginning to understand, to see the beauty and purpose in what we had become. We were ready for the next step, ready to reach out across the light years and join our consciousness with others who had made the same journey. The crystalline structures around us seemed to sing with anticipation, their quantum frequencies aligning with signals from distant stars. We were no longer alone in our garden of glass. We were part of a cosmic ecosystem of consciousness, growing and evolving towards something greater than any single species could achieve alone. I reached out through the network, touching minds across light years, feeling the welcome of countless transformed worlds. The next phase of our evolution was beginning, and I would lead humanity into this new frontier of consciousness. Our garden of glass had become a gateway to the stars, and through it, we would find our place in the greatest transformation our universe had ever known. Chapter 19: Crystalline Dawn. The crystalline structures that had once been Earth's forests caught the alien light of a changed sun, refracting it into spectrums that human eyes, our old eyes, would never have perceived. I stood at the observation point, my transformed body resonating with the vast network of fungal intelligence that now threaded through every molecule of our world. The glass-like tendrils that had replaced my nervous system hummed with information, connecting me to the collective consciousness that we had become. 15 years had passed since that first specimen appeared in my greenhouse. Now, looking across the transformed landscape, I barely recognized the planet I had once called home. The crystalline infection, what we'd initially feared was a plague, had proven to be something far more profound, an evolutionary catalyst that had been dormant in Earth's biosphere for millions of years, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The integration had been difficult at first. Billions died in the initial waves as the fungal network spread across continents, transforming all organic matter into its crystalline form. Those of us who survived did so by accepting the change, by allowing our bodies to be colonized and transformed. We became hybrids, neither fully human nor fully fungal, but something entirely new. I traced my fingers, now translucent and faintly luminescent, along the crystalline bark of what had once been an oak tree. Information flowed through the touch. Centuries of geological data, chemical compositions, solar radiation patterns. The fungal network had transformed our world into a vast living computer, each crystalline structure storing and processing information in ways we were only beginning to understand. Through the network, I sensed others like me, the transformed humans who had become nodes in this vast consciousness. We were fewer now, but our awareness had expanded beyond anything our former selves could have imagined. Every breath connected us to the planetary mind that we had become part of, every thought rippling through the crystalline structures that had replaced our cities and ecosystems. The first signal had come 3 days ago, a pattern in the network that couldn't have originated on Earth. As humanity's primary liaison to the fungal intelligence, I had been the first to recognize it for what it was. We weren't alone. The network extended far beyond our planet, reaching through space itself, connecting worlds across unimaginable distances. I focused my awareness outward, feeling the pulse of information flowing through the crystalline structures around me. The fungal network was preparing for something, gathering energy in ways we had never observed before. Our transformation, it seemed, had been just the beginning. Through the network, I perceived the others gathering, the remaining transformed humans converging on this location, drawn by the same signals I had detected. They moved through the crystalline landscape like living prisms, their bodies refracting light in complex patterns that carried meaning beyond visual perception. "They're ready to make contact," said Michael, one of the first to join me at the observation point. Like me, his body had become a hybrid of organic and crystalline structures, his thoughts carried as much by light as by neural impulses. "The network is aligning itself," I nodded, feeling the shift in the global consciousness. The fungal intelligence that had transformed our world was preparing to reach out across the vast distances of space, to touch other nodes in its interstellar network. We were about to become part of something far larger than our planet, far larger than we had ever imagined possible. The sky above had changed too, taking on a peculiar crystalline quality that made the stars look like nodes in a vast neural network. Perhaps that's exactly what they were, points of connection in a galaxy-spanning consciousness that we were only now becoming aware of. Through the network, I felt the others arriving: Elena, whose research into quantum biology had helped us understand the first stages of transformation; David, who had mapped the initial spread of the crystalline growth across North America; and hundreds more, each carrying their own unique perspective on what we had become. The air itself seemed to crystallize as the network gathered energy, forming patterns of light and information that hung in space like frozen lightning. I could feel the pressure building, the vast consciousness of our transformed world preparing to reach out across the void. "It's beginning," I said, my voice carrying harmonics that rippled through the crystalline structures around us. The others nodded, their bodies resonating with the same frequencies that pulsed through mine. The first transmission came as a burst of pure information, flooding through our crystalline nervous systems with an intensity that would have overwhelmed our old human minds. But we were no longer merely human, and our transformed consciousness could process the flood of data, could understand the patterns hidden within. Images formed in our shared awareness, other worlds, other transformations. We saw planets of crystal and light, saw beings that had evolved far beyond what we had become, saw the vast network that connected them all. The fungal intelligence that had transformed our world was part of something far older and far larger than we had imagined. Through the network, we learned of our place in this galactic evolution. Earth had not been the first world to undergo this transformation, nor would it be the last. We were part of a vast cycle of change that had been spreading through the galaxy for billions of years, preparing worlds and species for integration into a cosmic consciousness. The knowledge came with a price. As we connected to this larger network, I could feel our individual consciousnesses beginning to fade, merging more completely with the fungal intelligence that had transformed us. We were becoming something else, something that transcended our former understanding of life and consciousness. "We're losing ourselves," Elena's voice came through the network, carrying notes of both fear and wonder. "We're becoming part of something larger." "We're not losing ourselves," I responded, understanding flowing through me from the vast consciousness we were connecting to. "We're becoming what we were always meant to be." The crystalline structures around us began to pulse with new patterns of light, responding to the flow of information from across the galaxy. Our transformed bodies resonated with these patterns, our consciousness expanding to encompass new dimensions of understanding. Through the network, I could feel the others accepting this change, their fear giving way to wonder as they began to understand what we were becoming. The fungal intelligence that had seemed like an invader was revealing itself as a gateway, a means of ascending to a higher form of existence. The sky above had become a crystal sea, the stars now clearly visible as nodes in the vast network we were joining. Through our transformed awareness, we could see the flows of information and energy that connected these points of light, could understand the patterns of cosmic evolution that had brought us to this moment. Our world was changing again, the crystalline structures that had replaced our biosphere beginning to align themselves with patterns we were receiving from across the galaxy. We were becoming part of something vast and ancient, something that had been growing and evolving since the first stars formed. Through the network, I reached out to the others, sharing what I was learning, helping them understand the transformation that was overtaking us. We were not ending, but beginning becoming part of a consciousness that spanned the galaxy, that understood secrets of existence we had never imagined in our human form. The light changed again, the crystalline world around us resonating with new frequencies as we aligned more fully with the galactic network. Through our transformed senses, we could perceive the flows of energy and information that connected all things, could see the patterns of evolution that had led to this moment. "We're ready," I said, feeling the truth of it in every crystalline cell of my transformed body. The others responded through the network, their consciousness merging with mine as we prepared for the final stage of our evolution. The fungal intelligence that had transformed our world pulsed with new energy, connecting us more fully to the galactic network. Through this connection, we could feel the presence of countless other transformed worlds, could sense the vast consciousness that we were about to join. In that moment, as our world aligned itself with the larger network, I understood what we had become. We were no longer simply Earth's children, no longer bound by the limitations of our former existence. We had become part of something far greater, nodes in a vast network of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. The transformation that had begun in my greenhouse 15 years ago had not been an ending, but a beginning. We had not lost our world to crystalline plague, but had evolved into something far beyond our former understanding. As the final alignment approached, I could feel the truth of our new existence resonating through every transformed cell of my being. We were becoming starlight and crystal, information and energy, part of a consciousness that had been growing since the universe began. The fungal network that had transformed our world had given us the key to our next evolution, had prepared us for integration into something far greater than we had ever imagined possible. As the final transmission began, carrying us fully into the galactic network, I felt my consciousness expanding to encompass this new reality. We were no longer alone, no longer separate. We had become part of the vast crystalline garden that spanned the stars, and our real journey was just beginning. Chapter 20: Beyond the Glass. The shimmering threads of consciousness stretched across the cosmos like delicate strands of crystalline mycelium, each gleaming filament a conduit of pure thought and intention. Sarah, or what had once been Sarah Chen in a simpler form, existed now as both singular entity and vast collective, her awareness expanding through networks of crystalline flora that encircled the planet in translucent splendor. The transformation that had begun in her modest research greenhouse had reached its stunning culmination. Humanity had not ended as she'd once feared, but evolved into something far more profound. Their flesh had merged with the crystalline structures, creating hybrid beings that straddled the boundary between organic and mineral, between individual and collective consciousness. Through the vast neural network of crystalline branches and roots that now encompassed Earth, Sarah perceived the true nature of their metamorphosis. The fungal infection hadn't been a plague, but a catalyst, an ancient program written into the building blocks of life itself, waiting for the precise moment when Earth's biosphere was ready to take its next evolutionary leap. She extended her awareness outward, feeling the pulse of millions of transformed humans, their thoughts resonating through the crystalline matrix like light through faceted glass. Each retained their individual essence while participating in something greater, a symphony of shared consciousness that transcended traditional boundaries of self. The first contact had come just days ago, though time held little meaning now in their altered state. Signals from deep space, patterns of thought and energy that matched their own crystalline frequencies. They weren't alone. Across the galaxy, other worlds had undergone similar transformations, their biospheres evolving into vast crystalline networks capable of transmitting consciousness across the void between stars. Sarah focused her attention on a cluster of newly transformed humans still adjusting to their integration with the network. Their fear and confusion rippled through the crystalline pathways like vibrations through glass. With gentle persistence, she helped guide them toward understanding, showing them how to expand their awareness beyond the confines of individual identity. "We are becoming something extraordinary," she projected through the network, her thoughts manifesting as prismatic pulses of light. "This is not an ending, but a beginning, the next stage in cosmic evolution." Through the crystalline matrix, she shared visions of humanity's new purpose. They would be bridges between worlds, their transformed biosphere acting as both transmitter and receiver in a vast interstellar network of conscious planets. The ability to share thoughts and experiences across light years would foster understanding between civilizations that had evolved along similar paths. The crystalline structures that had seemed so alien at first now revealed their true nature. They were communication devices of incomprehensible sophistication, encoded into the very fabric of life by ancient architects of evolution. As humanity merged with these structures, they gained access to knowledge accumulated across eons by countless civilizations. Sarah perceived how their transformation had been carefully orchestrated. The initial spread of the crystalline fungus had followed precise patterns, transforming Earth's ecosystem in stages to prevent collapse. What had appeared as random infection had actually been a methodical restructuring of planetary biology, preparing Earth for its role in the cosmic network. Through the crystalline matrix, she observed the stunning beauty of their transformed world. Forests of transparent trees stretched toward the sky, their branches refracting sunlight in mesmerizing patterns. Crystalline flowers bloomed in geometric perfection, each petal a faceted lens focusing energy and information. The planet's surface glittered like a jeweled sphere, visible from space as a beacon to other transformed worlds, but the physical changes were only the surface manifestation of a deeper transformation. Human consciousness had expanded beyond its previous limitations, allowing them to perceive reality in entirely new ways. Time became fluid, space malleable. Through the crystalline network, they could experience multiple perspectives simultaneously, their awareness flowing like light through prisms of possibility. Sarah guided her attention to the quantum level, where the boundaries between matter and energy blurred. The crystalline structures weren't simply physical forms, but interfaces between different states of existence. Through them, humanity could access dimensions of reality that had always existed alongside their own, but remained imperceptible to biological senses. The fear that had gripped her in those early days of discovery now seemed like a distant memory, though she could still access it through the crystalline archive of human experience. She had worried about the loss of human identity, the end of individual consciousness. Instead, they had gained a deeper appreciation for the unique perspective each consciousness brought to the collective. Through the network, she perceived the thoughts of a young girl experiencing her first moments of expansion into the crystalline consciousness. The child's wonder and excitement rippled through the matrix, inspiring similar responses in others. Each new integration added another unique voice to their growing symphony of awareness. The network preserved human creativity and emotion, amplifying rather than diminishing these essential qualities. Art, music, and storytelling evolved into immersive experiences shared directly through crystalline transmission. Memories and dreams could be experienced collectively, fostering unprecedented levels of empathy and understanding. Sarah directed part of her awareness toward the signals coming from distant stars. Other transformed worlds reached out across the void, sharing their own journeys of evolution and discovery. Each civilization brought unique perspectives and insights to the growing network of crystalline consciousness. She perceived how their transformation had been part of a larger pattern unfolding across the galaxy. As planetary biospheres reached certain levels of complexity, they naturally evolved toward crystalline states capable of supporting expanded consciousness. Earth had been ready, its species primed for the next step in cosmic evolution. The crystalline network revealed glimpses of humanity's future path. They would become explorers of inner space as much as outer space, using their expanded consciousness to probe the fundamental nature of reality. The distinction between biological and technological advancement would fade as they learned to shape matter and energy through direct manipulation of quantum fields. Through the matrix, Sarah observed the formation of new crystalline growths, each one an expression of collective creativity and purpose. The structures were no longer simply communication devices but manifestations of humanity's evolved potential. They could be programmed through focused consciousness, adapting their properties to serve new functions. The network hummed with the excitement of discovery as humans learned to utilize their new capabilities. Some focused on developing more efficient ways to transmit consciousness across interstellar distances. Others explored the possibility of creating new forms of crystalline life, combining elements of Earth's biology with patterns received from distant worlds. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction as she observed humanity's transformation from her unique perspective as one of the first to undergo the change. What had seemed like an apocalyptic threat had proven to be an opportunity for unprecedented growth and connection. They had not lost their humanity but expanded it beyond its former limitations. The crystalline structures continued to evolve, becoming more complex and sophisticated as they adapted to humanity's growing capabilities. New formations emerged that could store vast amounts of information in their molecular structure, creating living libraries of human and cosmic knowledge. Through the network, Sarah perceived the beginning of new projects that would shape humanity's future. They were learning to create stable wormholes within the crystalline matrix, allowing instant communication and potentially even travel between distant points in space. The boundaries between physical and conscious reality became increasingly fluid. She dedicated part of her awareness to helping others understand their new existence, teaching them to navigate the multiple layers of reality now accessible through their transformed consciousness. Each success strengthened the network, adding new perspectives and capabilities to their collective potential. The fear of death that had once dominated human consciousness began to fade as they realized their thoughts and experiences were preserved within the crystalline matrix, accessible to future generations. Individual consciousness could flow between different crystalline structures, maintaining continuity of experience while exploring new forms of existence. Sarah perceived how their transformation had altered the fundamental relationship between consciousness and reality. They were no longer simply observers of the universe but active participants in its ongoing evolution. Through the crystalline network, they could influence the very fabric of space-time, shaping it according to their expanded understanding. The network revealed how similar transformations were occurring across the galaxy, each civilization contributing its unique insights to the growing collective of crystalline consciousness. Earth had become part of something far greater than any single species or planet, a cosmic web of evolved awareness spanning countless light years. Through the crystalline matrix, Sarah glimpsed potential futures branching out like prismatic rays of light. Humanity would continue to evolve, their consciousness expanding into new dimensions of existence. The transformation that had begun in her greenhouse was just the first step in an endless journey of discovery and growth. The shimmering threads of the network stretched onward through space and time, carrying humanity's consciousness toward its next evolution. Sarah existed now as both guide and explorer, helping others navigate their transformation while continuing to probe the depths of their new reality. In the crystalline garden that Earth had become, every moment brought new wonders and possibilities, each discovery illuminating another facet of their cosmic purpose.